It's really cool. It goes in Norway, and but you can buy them out of England or show pictures of or videos of hiking on them, scooters on them.
I want one. Never had one. It's a brand.
Hit 90 degrees. Never been that. Well, other than that, that was the first. How it would do in a wet time, you know, you shoot kids into that day. Yeah. Oh.
Planning Commission for the City of Wilsonville, Wednesday, August 8th, 2018, is now in session. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Greenfield?
Here.
Vice Chair Postma?
Here.
Commissioner Heblerling?
Here.
Commissioner Hurley? Commissioner Mesbah?
Here.
Commissioner Millen?
Here.
Commissioner Springall?
Here. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. This is a time in our monthly meeting when we set aside time for the opportunity to address the Planning Commission regarding any item that is not already scheduled for a formal public hearing tonight.
If any member of the audience would like to speak about any work session item or any other matter of concern, please raise your hand so that we may hear from you now. We do have a public hearing scheduled for tonight on the Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Master Plan. And in that hearing, I will again request public input. But if you have anything to address us on other than that matter, this would be the time to do it. Does anyone wish to address the commission? Then we'll move on to consideration of our Planning Commission minutes for July 11th. They were distributed to us at the end of last week. I assume everyone has had a chance to study them. They're quite extensive. Are there any changes or additions to be made to the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as distributed. We move on to our first major item of the night, which is a legislative hearing on the Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Master Plan. Who is representing staff tonight?
Thank you, Chair Greenfield. We'd like to invite Mike McCarty, Parks Director, Brian Stevenson, and Todd Blankenship, all. They're going to present to you the revised master plan that they've been working on since we opened the hearing date back in May.
Very good. At that time, we continued the hearing until this meeting. The hearing is therefore open. What we will do is hear again from our consultants and staff, and the commission will have an opportunity to address questions, after which I will invite members of the public to address the commission. And if the presenters will stand by for that, to be able to answer questions that might arise in that testimony. Please.
Are we good? First of all, the consultants will not be here tonight, and hopefully we can answer all your questions. We've been doing this for...
I neglected, I'm interrupting myself. I neglected to read the obligatory legislative hearing procedure. So here goes. Matters before the Planning Commission involve legislative public hearings. These are somewhat different from the quasi-judicial hearings conducted by the city's Development Review Board. Planning Commission would like to hear from anyone who has testimony to offer that is relevant to the issues before the Planning Commission. If you wish to testify tonight, please fill out the yellow cards on the side table and make sure that it's given to a member of the staff. Actually submit it to our clerk. That would be good. If you wish to testify tonight, make sure that your testimony gives you legal standing in the matter for which you are testifying. It is important that you provide your full name and address on the testimony card or at the beginning of your comments. When you do testify, please address your comments to the criteria that will be reviewed by the city staff at the start of the hearing. Some of the issues that come before the Planning Commission are fairly complicated, and the length of this report indicates that degree of complexity. For that reason, we especially appreciate any specific recommendations or suggestions you may have. We'll ask you to avoid redundant testimony. If you agree with testimony that has already been given, just tell us that. If we have a large number of people testifying tonight, we may limit the time allotted to each. It's not likely to be the case tonight. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and your address, or if you prefer not to state your address aloud in the public forum, state your address as it is provided on the testimony card. State your address as provided on the testimony card you submitted for the record, and speak into the microphone. At the end of your testimony, members of the commission may have questions for you. Thank you for taking the time for coming here tonight on this warm summer night and help us to deal with these issues. Now, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson Greenfield. Like I said earlier, or started to say, is the consultants will not be here from Greenplay tonight. We've been doing this now for over a year, and I believe between Todd and Brian and I, we can answer your questions. I would hope so, at least. And again, we're here to bring the final version of the Parks and Rec Comprehensive Master Plan tonight. Brian will give you a brief PowerPoint that will tell you where we're at. And again, it's probably 15, 20 slides. It's not going to be very long. Staff believes we have addressed the commission's comments, concerns, and the city council's comments and concerns and suggestions. And hopefully you agree. That is in your staff report and will be addressed in the PowerPoint. The only thing I need to, besides that, is I really need to thank these two guys, Erica Baylor, who is our rec coordinator, Asaman, who pretty much is, I hate to say this, but the director of Parks and Rec. She kind of keeps us going. I want to thank these people over here, Chris, Miranda, Charlie from the Planning Commission were awesome helps. Amanda from legal, same thing. We wouldn't have done it without them. Andy, and also Greenplay. I mean, it wasn't easy. We had to get through some hurdles, but that's probably common. But they were right along with us to make all the changes. They made them at a week's notice, a month's notice, whatever, and they hung in there with us and got this thing through. At least I hope they got it through. We'll find out tonight, I guess. But with that, I really don't have much else except Brian will give the PowerPoint. And if you have any questions about the park part, the rec part, or anything else, just let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So real quick, what we'll be running through tonight, just a quick overview of the planning process that we've been through. We'll recap the key findings. Those have not changed since the last time you saw us. And then highlight the various pieces that came from your feedback as well as city council feedback. The purpose of this plan, we're really just trying to update a roadmap for the department for the next foreseeable future. The plan's addressing the park development, the recreation services, trails, open space and natural resources preservation, the current deficiencies, and then the need for the future facilities. As Mike mentioned, we've been going at this for about a year now. So there were stakeholder focus groups. There was a community survey. We've had a number of public meetings gathering as much public input as we possibly could. From there, we took those findings. We came up with the goals, the recommendations. When we were here last, you saw the draft plan. Tonight, hopefully, we'll be looking at what is close to a final plan. The key findings, these were things that we just heard over and over from the community, things that they liked, things that they wanted us to focus our attentions on. They do have an appreciation of what we currently offer, the parks, the programs, the services. A consistent theme we heard is a desire for river access. Folks are wanting to be able to see the river, touch the river, get in the river. So what can we do to address that? Some other common themes were the need to add synthetic turf fields. There is a concern and a desire for indoor recreation and aquatic facilities. And then, you know, obviously protecting and preserving natural areas is a high importance to the community. Throughout this plan, one of the goals that we set forth as a department was to come up with our mission statement. And we did our best with this mission statement to kind of frame everything we felt was important within the department. And you'll see that all the goals and the objectives that we lay out after this are in an effort to meet that mission statement. And I'll just take a second, let you read through that. And hopefully we touched on everything that you as a commission find is important, because it's stuff as staff that we find this is important. Seeing heads nodding, we will move to the next slide. So the last time that we presented this plan to you, there were a few items that you felt could use more information, more detail, or in some cases, just a shift in wording to make it more amenable to this commission. The first one would be the use of pesticides. We're going to talk about that tonight in the Integrated Pest Management Plan. Protection of natural resources was something that you spoke about. We went back and forth on synthetic turf, so we'll touch a bit on that and recap where we fell on that piece. Highlighting a need for public art to be pulled out a bit more within this plan. And then one element that mildly came from this meeting, but also came from planning staff was how this particular Parks and Recreation Master Plan addresses future development within the city. So we'll just kind of detail how this plan will take a look at what happens. So if you recall at the last meeting, the Integrated Pest Management Plan, known as the IPM plan, Todd was able to speak on that, what that might hold. They are still working through that, so there is not a draft of that to present to you this evening. But what you see, objective 3.9, it did receive its own objective, and that's on page 132 of the plan if you want to move to it. But it reads, the department should work with other city departments for creation and implementation of a citywide IPM plan. And it goes on to say that we should select optimal integrated pest management strategies that balance social, environmental, and economic factors. And those 5 bullet points you see below there are actually pulled straight from the IPM plan itself. So those goals are what the IPM plan itself will be encompassing. Any questions that I can answer or Todd can answer on the IPM plan at this time?
When can we expect a draft of that?
We are hoping to have a draft ready for the September 6th council meeting. So we're still internally reviewing. At this point, it's really just some formalities, trying to get page numbering and headings and everything squared away. So I feel pretty good about where we're at right now.
So the intention is to take it straight to council. It's not, you're not planning on bringing the IPM to the planning commission beforehand.
We had not intended on it, no.
Will we get to see it perhaps afterwards or something?
Yeah, when it gets prepared for the city council packets, we can absolutely forward a copy to the planning commission when it is prepared for the city council packets.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, since you asked for comments, I like the objectives and the actions here. I think I'm very interested, you can probably tell, in the details of how this is going to work, and I'm eager to see what you come up with. Have you been consulting with other bodies, the people who brought the B-City program, the NCAP?
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
in the generation of this?
Yeah, the Northwest Alternatives to Pesticides was pretty integral in developing an IPM plan that we're now morphing with our Memorial Park Master Plan, and then taking some other pieces from other cities, entities that we felt should be in there, so, yeah.
Okay, so which other entities are you incorporating content from in terms of the plan?
Metro has a really good plan. Lake Oswego, we've dealt with them personally, had some meetings with them. They have a pretty good plan. Touched on some of the Eugene stuff as well.
Okay.
City of Eugene.
Thank you.
So the next topic was natural resources. And if you remember, natural resources was clumped together with a couple other items. So we felt that it made the most sense to pull it out. It's now objective 3.10 on page 133. And the objective itself is to maintain and improve Wilsonville's natural areas, including Tree City and Bee City USA designations. And under that, we have 3 specific action items. Action item 1 is provide appropriate care of natural resources, paying attention to biodiversity, pesticide management, and eco-friendly practices while following the city's IPM plan. And that's an action item that didn't exist to that detail in the last plan, but given the feedback we received from you, we felt it did deserve to be called out in a specific action item. Action 3.10B on the slide is condensed just to Tree City and Bee City USA. In the actual action in the master plan, there's a bit more detail into it, but that's the condensed version. And 3.10C is creation and implementation of an urban forestry management plan.
Does that exist, or is it in the works?
I would say it's in the works, but funding was provided for us starting July 1st this fiscal year, and there's been no work on it to this point. It's a community development driven program, so.
Any endpoint already envisioned? That is a date of completion?
That I can't answer.
Are there specific requirements for Tree City and Bee City designations having to do with pesticides?
As far as and I can try to speak to the Bee City portion of it. There are some items in there that ask for a reduction in use of chemical pest control products. Tree City, I'm not quite sure on that, but I'm sure it follows along the same lines as the Bee City.
I think the Tree City is about replacing trees and then having a tree code, which, you know, we do have a tree code in the city about for neighborhoods and things. Well, I have a question about the scope of the urban forestry plan you brought up. Is that presumably that stretches beyond the parks, but includes street trees and things like that?
Correct, yep.
We had an interesting presentation from the interns from last summer from SMART about, I don't know if you saw this, about the street trees and they made a survey of the street trees around the different neighborhoods, and some neighborhoods, they were more poorly affected than others by construction. Not really a parks issue, but it was a public works kind of issue, and so I think public works is going to have a pretty big contribution, hopefully, to the urban forestry plan.
Yep, absolutely. And one of those interns is currently on our staff now, and we're putting him to work and working on inventorying all the trees that weren't in existence for that, but yep.
Okay, thank you.
And will that plan, the urban forestry management plan, include like recommendations for what type of street trees are planted? I know right now that when you cut down a tree, there's really not a plan for what kind of tree you should replace it with. There's a global list but nothing specific. Will that include that? Do you know?
To my knowledge, that list is in existence, and that's part of what came out of the interns' work that they did last year.
So it does exist now. It didn't.
Correct.
Last year when I had to deal with it, but okay, thank you.
You want? Go on.
Moving on to synthetic turf. This was a topic of discussion for a couple different reasons last time, but you'll see that objective 1.8 now reads, the department should consider development of synthetic turf fields in an effort to meet the demand of the community for year-round play. Staff should explore synthetic surfaces that best needs of the community. Action 1.A under there, it lists a variety of things, but one thing I do just want to make sure that you do take note of, we do call out the safety and environmental concerns, as well as the financial projection, for construction and replacement. So I know those were concerns of both the citizens that were here as well as members of the commission. So just want to highlight that those were added to the description on the synthetic turf piece.
Looking at page 127 where this objective appears, the language is, as you say, adopting our recommendation of substituting the word consider for develop in the original formulation. The develop language persists in the action indicated, and I'm wondering whether that is an inconsistency we ought to repair. As it stands, the action statement is develop priorities for installation of synthetic turf fields, et cetera. That could be read as an endorsement and directive to install synthetic turf. And I don't think that was our intention.
Do you feel that way even though it falls directly under the objective that says should consider?
It seems to be inconsistent with that objective to use the action verb develop.
So if you were to change the wording of that, what would you be comfortable with?
What I would feel comfortable with is a study. What I feel would be even more comfortable with is perhaps even a referendum on the issue, a community referendum on the issue, but to at least substitute again the word consider for develop.
How about develop priorities for the consideration of installation of synthetic turf fields?
I could buy that.
I like that too.
So just to develop priorities for consideration?
For the consideration of installation of synthetic fields. So develop priorities for the consideration of installation of synthetic turf fields.
Okay.
Point is, I think we should be delivering to council a document which has a little more flexibility for them as the final decision makers in this sensitive issue.
I said we try to get them all. I didn't promise we did.
No, you did do a very, very good job of it. Thank you very much.
You almost got him.
Yeah. Anything else there?
No,
Go
that
ahead.
takes care of it.
Next up was public art. The request to make that a standalone action. We didn't have any issues with it. Previously, if you recall, it was tied in with other park amenities, restrooms, tables, drinking fountains. While they're all important, there is nothing at harm by calling it out as its own action item. So we did make that change.
Thank you. I smile because I smile at myself because this is a pet issue.
Talking about pet issue, I thought one of your pet issues was to identify the location where they have been obscured over the years. Are some of those locations in parks? Because this could explore opportunities to feature public art, covers existing and new public art, presumably.
Certainly wouldn't hurt to have it mentioned here. There is a more fundamental consideration of public art to be handled with another city body, perhaps a commission or a task force, however it's handled. And that body would certainly start with an inventory of what exists in Wilsonville, as well as querying the community about what they want to exist. But it wouldn't hurt to have it mentioned here as well. Is that possible to work in a couple of words?
Oh, go ahead.
So are you saying like the creation of a arts commission?
Well, no, I think that goes beyond this document, the purpose of this document. And I believe it's already in the city council hopper under consideration. But it wouldn't hurt to have it cross-referenced here.
The only thing I would add is we did have the communication about this topic internally. And I think as staff, as far as what goes into a Parks and Recreation master plan, we support public art. We would support public art within the parks. And there's not a doubt that if that commission, when that commission comes to fruition, which is a work in progress, we would support the public art. I guess the only hesitation I would have is does that commission determine that the existing pads within the park maybe aren't the best choices at this time? They were 10 years ago. So we did make the conscious decision to leave this general, to support public art, but not get into the detail and allow a body that was solely focused on art to be the ones to make those decisions for us.
I raised that issue without any knowledge that there is an existing public art piece in one of the existing parks that's obscured by weeds or brush and you can't see it anymore. And that's why I was asking the chair, who's much more familiar with these lost public art pieces, whether or not any of those exist. If they do, then I was hoping to bring it to the attention of the park staff so that you could highlight the existing art pieces as opposed to also featuring new ones as parks expand and so forth.
So are we recommending a change to any language there? I, for one, tend to prefer the general because it leaves the door open for broader action, but I'm just trying to get a sense of where we're at so that we can direct them where we're at.
So long as the general includes what I was talking about, I'm fine with it. I was
Yeah,
just
so
making
there's-
sure that that
yeah.
was part of the general. Existing and new. Is
So exploring
basically-
opportunities to feature would still cover that point that you're talking about, which would movement, correction of things around, okay.
Could we insert the words existing and future?
As you wish, Mr. Chair.
Would that be a significant amendment?
So after feature, you're saying to insert that?
Existing and future.
Existing, future?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
Anything else? Ahead.
And finally, a section was added that really opens up conversation and details what future development we would be looking at within this particular Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So it's going to include design and construction of parks and recreation facilities as part of the Basalt Creek planning area. Also would cover things that are added to the UGB and annexed into the city. Just being sure that we're working properly with other city departments and private developers, that the community's needs are being met in the way of parks and recreation. And then finally, working with Oregon Parks and Recreation for public access to and development of a 15-acre site that currently sits outside of the city on the Willamette River.
Better make sure I turn my mic on first. So the first sub-bullet for design and construction of parks and rec facilities as part of the future Basalt Creek planning area, is that really necessary when you have the second bullet that is a general, we're going to ensure adequate parks and rec facilities are provided in all future planning areas? Why the
I
why
defer
the
to Miranda on that
specifics?
one.
I would imagine that the second bullet would incorporate the first one. I think there was a question that came up about specifically around Basalt Creek planning area and how that would be incorporated, since it is one of the areas that we just brought into the urban growth boundary. And since it was a joint effort with another city, there wasn't a lot of detail laid out for parks planning in there, as it was sort of directed to both two cities. I think you could go either way. You could have the more specific bullet at the beginning, or you could rely on the second, more broad bullet that would encompass it as well.
Because the Basalt Creek planning area, or at least Wilsonville's portion, is still going to be our responsibility to ensure that there's adequate parks and recreation access. We're not going to control the Tualatin
Correct.
side of it. So
Correct.
it seems like the second bullet covers that condition as well.
I think we did call this out specifically as something which had not been mentioned, and no account had been made of the Basalt Creek Canyon in our inventory of present and future parks. I think that we are responsible for your inclusion of that, if I recall correctly.
Not pointing any fingers. We're just here to appease whatever direction you'd like to go this evening.
Maybe the first bullet should be a sub-bullet for the second bullet.
You're suggesting including Basalt Creek planning area?
Yes. As a sub-bullet in the second.
Yes, in all future planning areas, including the Basalt Creek
Yes.
planning area. That's elegant. Then we could drop the first bullet.
One of the things, you talk about the 15-acre landing site that's outside the UGP. One of the things that I brought up at our last conversation about this is, and I'm speaking fully cognizant of my ignorance about the subject, because this may already be done by Metro or somebody, but in addition to identifying park and recreation facilities, we should be identifying natural areas, because natural resources is currently part of this. I'm not seeing that here. I see a kind of a reference to it in principle with that last bullet and the 15-acre Willamette Meridian landing site. I don't know if that's going to be a park site or a natural resources site, a natural site. So unless it's being done by Metro or some other entity, they are identifying these natural areas, preservation areas, so to speak, I don't know where we would highlight that as the urban area expands, we should be identifying those and including them as at least target preservation areas in our long-range planning.
Sure. No, you're correct. It is not called out in this future development slide. There is an action item, and I'm trying to find it on the fly for you, but there is one about acquiring natural areas or open space that is a bullet point in here, if I'm not mistaken.
Takes care of it. Thank you.
I would also note, just for the purpose of this discussion, that Metro does map out regionally Title III and Title 13 natural area lands consistent with Goal 5 for the state. When planning does comprehensive planning, master planning, area planning for new urban growth boundary areas, we look to those regional layers, gain that information about natural resources, do a scan of existing conditions in an area, highlight the natural resources that need to be protected, should be protected or mapped. And then when we go through the phase of actually bringing that area in for the master planning, we will look at that layer and determine the accuracy of it. And then when the land is annexed in, we do the sort of on-ground testing of that to determine the specific delineations of those areas. So that process is done when we're doing the planning for the urban growth boundary areas.
Happy to hear that. When we look at the accuracy of it, do we look at the accuracy of it based on what is important to Metro or what's important to Wilsonville?
So they kind of go hand in hand in terms of the classification system. But my understanding is that Wilsonville's is a little bit, the word be more conservative. And so,
Resources, yes.
yes, and so that is, that's the approach that we take. So we get to use our local regulations and the way we delineate resources, as long as it's in compliance with the regional layer. So you can go above and beyond, which our standards do.
So that's hand in glove. So that's part of the planning process. It's not part of the park department's work.
Right.
Excellent. That's what I was looking for.
more before we go on? Okay.
And finally, just wanted to recap, from our perspective, those were the main issues or ideas that came from this commission. Additionally, City Council had 3 things that they just were their questions or items that they wanted some further explanation on. One was including a school district facility list, and that's on page 50. That's just so that we're showing a full comprehensive list of what's available to the community as a whole in regards to gym space, field space, and playgrounds. The joint use agreement with the school district, that was an objective that was in the plan to begin with, but there was just the request to add a little bit more detailed language surrounding that specific element, so we did that, and that's on page 131. And then, as I mentioned, or has been mentioned before, there are some members of City Council that are just wanting to be sure that there is the inclusion of the addition of synthetic turf sports fields within this Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So that's more or less just a FYI. We heard council, and those are the elements that they wanted encompassed in this plan.
Just a little thing on the map facing, well, it's actually on page 51. And on all of the other maps that have a comparable representation, the magenta areas are indicated as future schools, but that includes the Meridian Park School. In all of those maps, that's indicated as a future school for accuracy, and this is an historical document. That probably ought to be corrected. I would say simply school.
And the reason that is as we mentioned, we've been working on this for a year plus now.
Yes.
And I think when they started their mapping, it was a
Exactly.
future.
That's what I assumed. That's what I assumed.
But your point is well taken.
Anything else?
Page 54.
And that concludes all we had.
Exactly, the same map on page 54 as well, while you're at it.
Yeah, it's in 2 or 3.
Oh, it's in all the maps.
Now, comments on the report overall.
I have just one question, and I'm sorry, I should have brought it up at the last meeting, and I didn't. And it's on objective 1.5, around ADA accessibility at all facilities. I'm just curious, it indicates in the objective that there's an ongoing self-evaluation and continued implementation. Where's that implementation plan reviewed? Who does that, and where does that reside?
You want to speak to it?
I can try, yeah. So there was an ADA assessment completed, I believe, in 2014. And so obviously with any new construction that happens, that's something that we make sure we address. Right now, it was a very costly total when it came down to the total cost to basically implement the plan. So kind of just chipping away at low-hanging fruit, adding concrete slabs to areas where we needed some additional turnaround space type of thing. So I guess, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but we're just slowly chipping away at it.
I guess my question is more, is there here are the things we'd like to accomplish, and where are we bumping up against that and saying, yeah, we're getting there or we're not getting there? This is a little vague to me in terms of kind of addressing that. Does that make sense? In other words, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and we hope to accomplish it in this kind of time frame. And I understand that, it takes time and as resources are available, but.
Yeah, so I guess.
It's just who's bumping up against that initial study and saying, are we there? Are we close?
Yeah, collectively, that's us as a department. The assessment itself was, I believe, 200 and some pages long. So within that document, it also lays out the objectives and the timeline. So I think the overall timeline was 10 to 15 years to have everything implemented and taken care of.
Okay, I guess my question still isn't being answered. Who's taking a look at that and saying, we're halfway through this, or we're, only a quarter of the way through this? Where is that process happening? Within the department? Is
Yeah,
that?
collectively, it's with the
Okay.
staff here, yep.
So on a periodic basis, you yank this dusty old document out and say, here we are on this, okay. All right. Yeah, it's just, the action is kind of continue to implement. It sort of implies that there's going to be a more of a check and balance that we're getting there. And I'm not sure that quite says it, but maybe it does.
Is there a periodic status report?
Yeah, I guess that's where I was looking at, some evaluative criteria that's going on to say, yeah, we're getting there, or no, we're not, or we're failing, or we're way behind, or.
Yes, so currently, no, there is not, but that's a point well taken, and we can certainly make that something that we review quarterly or biannually or something.
Thank you. That's sort of the thing that's an action to me, that this is continued, that's not an action. That's just sort of, gee, that's nice. But, having some kind of checkpoint where you're periodically, and I recognize and understand you're not going to fix it all tomorrow, but you have to say, where are we and where do we want to be, or we'll never get there.
The thing I'm sorry, to point out on that is just that it's a citywide plan, so it's not necessarily specific to all of our parks. Is that true? Like, we're looking overarching of the city as a whole?
Yeah.
That was going to be my question. Is there a published city plan to monitor ADA compliance?
I'm not clear on the performance monitoring that's included within the ADA plan or not. The engineering division of the community development department is who's responsible for that ADA plan, who published it and highlighted the different projects that we need to come into full compliance. That's something that we can check on and get back to you in terms of what sort of performance measurements laid out in that plan and how often we're going to revisit it and look at how far we are in the project implementation.
That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for some.
I will follow up with engineering and get back to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Springle.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you to the park staff. I think you've done a nice job in incorporating the a more explicit focus on natural resources. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm very much looking forward to seeing this IPM and perhaps I'd like to have a discussion about that when there's something to look at. Although I recognise it's going to the City Council. So the only thing that jumped out at me there's a lot of things in here, but one thing in particular jumped out at me when going through the attachment, the action plans, was I was just going down the capital cost estimates, and the Frog Pond Community Park has a cost estimate of $12.5 million. And I thought, so I was paged through and I tried to find something else that was anything that was comparable. I couldn't find anything else that was comparable in terms of the cost. So why is the Frog Pond Park $12.5 million?
Well, you're talking about right now 10-acre park, that's what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's the one.
It's
right.
a 10-acre park, and when you're talking about possibly synthetic turf fields, again, it's considering synthetic turf fields, and a 10-acre park, when you're putting in, there's lighting, which is very expensive, the turf itself, there's the drainage you have to put in, everything involved. It's approximately, we're guessing, and we've looked at other cities, $4 to $5 million per 5 acres.
Okay. So it's the sports fields themselves that's really...
And that's all sports fields out there. And the other thing is that we don't know when we might get the money or what's going to happen to get the funds to do this. And the cost of projects are definitely not going down. So we're trying to maybe project a little bit out there because construction costs, they're going up every day pretty much. And as we've seen in all the projects, and I think planning's seen in their projects, is you might plan for something 2 months from now, it doesn't happen for 2 years from now, and then all of a sudden there's a 20% increase. So we're trying to project out for that too.
Okay, thank you.
Anything more? Okay, thank you. If you would stay close by, I have cards for 2 people who wish to speak. First is James Barnes.
I didn't have anything additional to add, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The second is Steve Benson. Mr. Benson, if you'd come up to the table.
My name is Steve Benson. I live at 8525 Southwest Wilson Lane, Wilsonville, Oregon. I have a pet peeve, but I want to use it in a broader sense. My pet peeve is that we can't get a kayak launch attached to the dock in Memorial Park because of ADA rules. In other words, even though people just walk down there with their kayaks and launch, apparently the access from the parking lot up above doesn't meet the standard. So this launch idea has been in the master plan for quite a while. And so it brings me to a question about when we go from master plan to master plan and the same items remain in it and never get completed, how do we assess whether they still should be in there, or should there be some kind of evaluation and explanation why it hasn't been done yet?
Short answer, someone asking that question can get the process started.
Well, I'm almost thinking maybe there should be something that when in master plans expires and items aren't completed, there needs to be an evaluation around those items.
Technically speaking, I don't think the master plan expires, it gets updated.
Okay, all right. When it gets updated, then maybe an explanation of why items don't get completed. Anyway, just something for you to consider as something as I look at, you know, as I get frustrated over things that don't get done, and it'd be nice to have something out there saying exactly why it didn't happen, and it would require a little bit of time, but that should be part of, I think, of the master planning process.
So we can consider this as an issue which has been idling along and it needed a little bit of push.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps this is the occasion for such a push.
Yeah, well, it's not the only item. For example, you know, to me, it's like it's going to be really hard to get that in there because the turf for the master plan for Memorial Park is a higher priority. It's higher up on the list than completing the parking lot in the back of the park there and working on the road that goes down to the boat launch. So if we do things in order in a master plan and we never get funding for a multi-million-dollar turf fields, then when do these other items get done? And all the items on that part of the master plan would kind of just sit there and not get completed until higher priority items get done. And if you never get funding for them, then a whole lot never gets done.
This is a global critique of planning, which planning has been trying to deal with for a couple of decades now. The plan document is typically reflective of the desires of the community. So if a boat launch continues to be desired, by golly, it'll show up in some plan. What you're highlighting, though, is a very important point, and that is that in our planning, we typically do not have a detailed coverage of the implementation steps necessary for the wishes. And there is a reason for that. As a person who was a planner and a staffer, I can tell you, you never want to sit in front of a commission and tell them that the boat launch that everybody wishes to have is going to have maybe a chance in 200 years to be funded? Because that's not going to be popular. What you're doing is telling the population, the residents, that we heard you. This is in our plan. If we come up with the money, we can do it. And if it doesn't come up with the money, then you say, well, we didn't have the money. And who's at fault? The residents who don't want to pay high taxes presumably are going to be at fault. But the point you make is a very important one, and I've been kind of talking to our staff about having not that detail. I mean, you can't jump into that deeper pool in short notice, but starting to have realistic steps towards implementation in all of our plans is what we should start moving towards. And prioritizing is the first step, but then putting a timeline on it is the second step. DOT does that all the time. And in fact, when you talk about some ramp being updated, they say, well, no way ever is this going to happen with our current funding. So that's telling you it's important, but we don't have the money for it.
Yeah, or sunset some things like if we don't get a turf in by such and such date, then those smaller priced items that are behind it can be implemented.
I don't think that just because it's a lower priority item means that it won't get implemented. It's a matter of political will. If there's the decision made by the council that this lower priority item needs to be done, it'll get done. That's really what it comes down to. And that comes down to the citizens voicing their desires for that specific thing in a large enough quantity that it becomes something that is an urgent issue rather than just something that is important in a document.
I agree with that.
And there's another step that goes with that, by the way. Grassroots fundraising for something that a group of kayakers want is public service, and it is really laudable. If enough people are interested in something and start doing that, it'll happen, because now you're offering the Parks Department the funding to do that project.
Oh, well, that's not really what is in the way of it. It's the ADA standards for actually getting to the boat launches that's in the way, and that's a lot pricier than just putting the boat launch in itself.
Remind me, is this addressed at all in the Memorial Park master plan?
It is. It's actually in the plan. I'm a kayaker, so I watched that one pretty extensively. It's almost like you and I have talked about this before. Yeah, so it's expected to go to the boat dock down at Memorial Park. It's been on the plan for some time.
There's also going to be another one in the Boones Ferry Park master plan.
Correct.
And that seems to have some specificity to it already.
Actually, no. I think the last iteration we saw of that did not have it in favor of the walk-down portion for the current road down there.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to meet ADA standards, that steep decline
that steep
down
grade
there
is never
too,
going to get there, but it's steep grade over to the docks on that park as well, so.
But there is a plan for a boat building for.
Correct.
So.
Well,
anyway,
your concern is on the record. Thank you
Thanks.
very much for bringing it to us.
Thank you.
Right, then I will, does anyone else wish to address us on this issue, on the Parks Master Plan? That being the case, I will call the public hearing closed, and we'll have a discussion in commission. So before we do that, I'm going to pull the, I guess the English, no, it's not really English teacher hat on. It's it's actually more out of my design sensibility, having taught this. Since this is a draft, but it's an important document that should be widely read and for some time, I would suggest some formatting adjustment in the attachment A. As I get the scheme, this whole thing seems to be done in the form of a spreadsheet. And the goals are highlighted in kind of an ugly olive color, which makes actually the type rather illegible. But nonetheless, it is distinct from the action, which is a brighter green color. If the spreadsheet is broken, if the table is broken above each of the goals, so there is a break there, it'll let that goal be distinguished, easier to find. It'll affect some of the pagination, I think. There are a couple places where actually the goal is separate, the olive line is separated from the rest of the table that it pertains to on different pages, and that's especially confusing. If you're going back to try to find the goal that governs a section, it's hard to find sometimes.
So are you recommending essentially a page break at each goal to ensure that a goal starts on a new page?
Not necessarily a page break, but a table break. That's a simple thing. It's just kind of trivial, but it nonetheless will make the document easier to use.
It's interesting you say that. I had a similar problem, except I couldn't, the actions are, a nice thick bar, and then you had to backtrack, because your eye picks out that thick green bar where it says action, then you had to backtrack to find the objective that was actually hard to see. So just, again, I completely agree, the formatting is kind of interesting.
I would consider a different color for the objectives.
So just to be clear, page 127, after action 1.8A, you would, what I hear you saying is that you'd like white space between the end of that and goal number 2.
Yes. Realize this isn't really a planning issue.
It looks like it's become a planning issue.
In the future, I think this would be very good.
And the reason we didn't put like neon yellow or anything in there is we were trying to go with the city colors. So that was the whole intent there, but we did not divide them.
Well, you don't need to use orange, I guess. Anything else here? Now, I consider that the changes that I've suggested are in the order of editorial changes that don't really require any formal approval.
Non-substantive, yes.
Is the city expecting us to act on a motion to endorse or to adopt this? We're not actually adopting, we're recommending this resolution to the council.
Correct. Staff is requesting
Then
an action this evening.
Then I will hear a motion to that effect.
I got one, and since I saw our assistant city attorney scribbling down as I was scribbling down, I'm hoping she will throw darts at me if I'm missing something here. So I would move that we approve resolution LP 18-0003, recommending approval and adoption of the 2018 Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Master Plan with revisions to section 1.6C on page 125, as was indicated on the record, to section 1.7H on page 127 of Exhibit A, as indicated on the record, to section 1.8A on page 127, as indicated on the record, and just by way of a non-substantive point, but an encouragement from up here, would be an encouragement for correction of the maps that shows Meridian Creek Middle School as a future school throughout the document, since that occurs in additional maps, and some other non-substantive considerations that have been brought up regarding formatting. Did I catch it?
Well done.
That's my motion.
Second.
It's my responsibility to repeat the motion, but I'm going to trust that the clerk has got it right, and I'll simply reduce it to, it has been moved that we recommend to City Council with a do adopt recommendation resolution number LP 180003. There's a second. Further discussion? Those in favor of this resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution, aye. Resolution passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Hey, before you finish, I left one person out of the thank yous, and Tammy from planning is like with Awesome One up there. She did so much for us, and I was thinking the whole time, how do I get that in there? And
She's a real detail
I needed to
person.
get that in there.
It's appropriate. Thank you.
Moving on then, we have on the agenda another hearing with the expectation that the hearing is actually going to be very brief and continued to a time certain on October 10th. Could we launch into it? This is a hearing on the Boones Ferry Park Master Plan. It's necessary to open the public hearing even if we're not expecting testimony tonight. The hearing is now open.
Is that me?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, we are asking for a continuance to October 10th and to leave this hearing open. We didn't feel like the document we were going to present was the best we could present, and we don't want to do that. So we would like to continue it to October 10th.
Is there any objection to doing so?
Well, we need a formal motion, correct? So I would move that we postpone and continue consideration of the Boones Ferry Park Master Plan to a date certain of October 10, 2018.
A second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded that we continue the hearing on the Boones Ferry Park Master Plan to a date certain on October 10th, 2018. Those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. The hearing is continued.
With an indication that Commissioner Mesbah does not participate in this vote, correct?
Thank you. And we do have another major item for our consideration tonight, and this is in the manner of a work session. And the staff has been busy.
Thank you, Chair Greenfield. Commissioners, my name is Miranda Bateshell. I'm Planning Manager for the City of Wilsonville. And I will be presenting to you this evening along with Alex Stupi, who is the project manager from MIG Consulting Firm, who's been helping us on this project. You've met him a few times now. And also Jennifer Scola in the audience. She may be here to help answer some questions through this project and has helped us all a great bit along this way. We are excited to be here and start talking to you about details. We've spent a couple years now. We started with visioning about 18 months ago with the community. We went through a series of design workshops, talking to people about their preferences for town center, and then really talked to the community over about 30 events last summer about what ideas they have for a community design concept. And you'll remember that we took that community design concept back out to the community to ground truth it and make sure that what we had been hearing was right, and make sure that before we finalized this concept into a plan and before we started to create details around design and development code and implementation actions, that we got it right and identify the areas where it might not quite be right yet or where more work needed to be done to resolve concerns that we were hearing in the community. And so we conducted a number of outreach activities at the earlier part of this year. We had a community concept open house here at City Hall. We had a Latino family night, which was an open house in Spanish. We had an online survey, and then we held a number of other sort of out and abouts, going out, getting more information through the library with our question of the month and online, as well as doing a semester-long project with Meridian Creek Middle School's 7th grade math class. So at the first open house, that was February 8th here at City Hall. A few of the key takeaways from that was we had a lot of support for mixed use, particularly mixed use office by I-5, and then mixed use retail ground floor with residential above in the Main Street area. We had a lot of continued support for that Main Street concept that came from the community and a lot of excitement for it. We heard a need for more transit and a request for more art. There was a lot of excitement for the bridge and Bridge Landing Park concept. There was a desire for festival streets as well as pedestrian-only zones or walking paths, and so that could be either permanent or just during festivals or for sort of different activities. And then there was support for the Wilsonville Road crossings, and there was an idea that came out there that night of consolidated timing for crossings that people were really excited about. The Latino Family Night was held in partnership with the school. Wood Middle School has a Spanish program, and they helped us to put on this event and partner with us along with the other Latino family groups that we've been working with throughout all of the schools. And we hosted this in partnership with them. Some of the key takeaways that we got that evening was more support for the increased activity and the idea to create more year-round activities. They really wanted more space and activities for youth, including the potential for a community center. There was a lot of focus on safety and increasing safety through ideas around increasing lighting, better crosswalks and crossing opportunities, more bus shelters. And again, we heard a lot more support for increased transit service and connectivity. We also heard the support for taller buildings, and they really want more local, diverse, international options in shopping. So we're hearing a lot of the same continued kind of ideas and concepts. We also hosted an online survey from January 24th to March 7th during the same time to get input for those who couldn't make it to the in-person open houses. We had over 460 people participate in that. Again, we heard support from the community. They continue to coalesce around these same ideas. As you can see, these are pretty high numbers in terms of supporting each of the different elements in the concept. One of the biggest concerns we heard was traffic, and as you know, we're going to be doing a traffic analysis and bringing that information to you, and that will be something we're talking about. There was a lot of support even within these sort of different elements. We had over 84%, we had 84% supporting the bridge and the Bridge Landing Park, 92% supporting the green linking open space. So there's a lot of support for additional green in Town Center. And then we had, again, a lot of support on the transportation side. It was interesting with the Main Street concept. We had both people commented, is the Main Street too oriented towards cars? It really should be facilitating pedestrian and bike access primarily, and maybe don't have cars. And then on the other side, we had questions, are you gonna allow cars on Main Street? So part of that is communication. And then the other part of that is, I think, what we've heard throughout this whole process is the balance, which I know all of you have really been focused on, is how do we balance the different users and create a really great space. So we're hearing that. And then one of the other things we heard sort of mixed reviews on was housing. We had a lot of people at the actual events have a lot of support for housing. We had people in the survey comment that they want housing, including affordable housing. And then we also had some who are not very supportive of additional housing in town center. So that's something that we'll probably want to talk about through the rest of this process. So without repeating myself too much, the community really supports the Main Street District, the green links, the multimodal transportation, the bike ped bridge, more activated public spaces, making it year-round. And this is where I think the nuance gets into play and where we're going to spend some time talking with you over the next few months. Some of this will be through the code work, but some of this will be through project lists and other implementation actions we'll be bringing to you. One of the things you'll note has changed slightly as Alex he'll go into more detail about some of these, because what we did was we took some of these questions and concerns and started looking at, okay, how do we refine then the community design concept, make some revisions, make some changes to modify that. We're not modifying things hugely, but refining the ideas that we'd had already as we move into this next phase into putting together a draft plan and those actions. So one of the things we heard at these events and through the online survey was about the Bridge Landing Park. Some people said, do we really want a park right next to I-5? Is that where I want my kids playing with the noise? And is that really the most conducive place for a park? And so one of the, people really wanted a landing space, really wanted a gateway and a welcoming, but they also wanted it to function as bringing people into the heart of town center and really making that connection, which is what we heard before, which created the Green Link concept, was that connection between the bridge, town center park, and Memorial Park. And so what we'll talk a little bit more about some of the changes we've made related to that. We also had a lot of not much understanding about the modified town center loop west, a lot of questions around that, and what that would do for congestion, so we'll get more into that. Parking, people want consolidated parking, but they also want to make sure it's adequate. And then housing, we had a lot of support, and I would say that it's more than 50-50 that support it, but we are having some people who have concerns about additional housing in town center, particularly as it relates to parking. And so I think when we have these conversations, we'll want to keep that in mind. And then a need for increased transit service, which I've mentioned, I think now 4 times. So I'm glad Smart's in the room. And so with that, as I mentioned, the project team has updated and refined the community design concept, and we have a lot of direction, I think, on some of the implementation details. So I'm going to hand it over to Alex now and sort of go through some of those changes for you. And one of the first things that we're tackling on the implementation side with you is the design guidelines and development code, and that's what we're going to spend most of tonight talking about you with. There will be other implementation pieces that we will be bringing to you in your upcoming meetings, but as we all know, it takes a while to get those design development codes right, and so we wanted to bring those early and start the conversation early.
Great. Well, thank you, Miranda. Thanks for having us back in this evening. Once again, I'm Alex Dupuy with MIG, and I'm just going to talk briefly about the community concept and what's changed since we last met with the task force back in June. What you'll see through these next slides is really a lot more specificity. What were once kind of fat arrows pointing to directions is really started to get nailed down into specific locations, street cross sections, really starting to build the town center vision from what we've heard over the past couple of years. So I'm going to step through, thank you, Miranda. I'll just step through these briefly. As Miranda discussed earlier, from the public engagement component from the initial community concept, there was a very high level of support for the Emerald Chain that we had called it, which is essentially linking the future pedestrian bridge over I-5 down to Memorial Park through a series of interludes, if you will, through town center. And the focus of that, and really that northwest gateway, there was a lot of discussion through both the survey and the open house on what is that key public space. It's certainly an entry and a portal, but how does that start to function, and how does that function within the larger multimodal system? And so we took a look at that. Next slide. We took a look at that specific space. and thought about, if this is a true gateway, what does that start to look like? We're not designing that pedestrian bridge over, but, it's a key and a critical element as a gateway into Wilsonville. And we've been using a series of precedent images to start to talk about that bridge. This is an example in Denver over I-25, which is very similar to I-5 in terms of just capacity. But the important thing to look at this is that it doesn't enter into a large park. It enters into a fairly intimate space. People do what they need to do to get on and off the bridge. It's attractive, it's a gateway, but it's not a place you're necessarily gonna be playing basketball. It's a place to, kind of be and understand where you're at, but not necessarily stay for a long time. And that's what we had heard was important to folks. It's maybe this isn't the best place for me to always be there, but it should be beautiful and it should be attractive and it should announce your entry into town center.
I know this bridge, it has a very large footprint on both ends.
It does. And it's actually a series of bridges that goes from the multimodal station in downtown Denver all the way across I-5. So it's become, I grew up in Denver actually, and it's become a catalyst for some really great development on both sides of that bridgehead, even though you have I-5 right there, or I-25 in this case, right there. Next slide. So with that, when I was talking about specificity in terms of multimodal connections and trail connections, one thing we heard very clearly was, bike lanes are great, and we certainly have proposed a number of bike lanes through town center that connect to the larger system. But it's really about that ease and that safety if you're with your family and you're riding your bike or you're walking. And so creating a series of trails that mimic that emerald chain that we had discussed early on, that takes you from the bridgehead, across the bridgehead to Villebois or other locations, but allows you to kind of march south towards Memorial Park, connecting to the future Main Street, connecting to Town Center Park, really providing those key connections that are very safe and very easy for a variety of, it's not just people wearing Lycra riding through here. These are families with kids and dogs and strollers, and so making it safe and effective, but also pretty and attractive as you step through that. So this spine, if you will, for this trail is very important from what we've heard as the vision. Again, this is the open space network. We've seen this slide. There's a few key spaces I want to talk about specifically. And the one is the promenade, right between what's now the existing theater and the Fry's site. What we were thinking about for this is as you come off the gateway or you're going towards the gateway for the bridge, there's a space there that has some interesting qualities. It's quiet. Fry's has been identified throughout this process as a potential redevelopment site, whether it's commercial or office or mixed use, but providing those key spaces where people can relax throughout the trip down through town center. And as a part of that, it requires a different type of development. It doesn't mean that when the bridge comes on, the pedestrian bridge comes on in 3, 5, 7 years, whenever that process takes, you can still provide that connection, but ultimately having this promenade, a linear space, a small park space that's activated and programmed with surrounding development, but also, providing things like stormwater, providing those connections, but also kind of having this small space where people can congregate. And when we think of these types of things, we again use precedent images that we've been using throughout the process that people have responded to very well. Public art, but still having that quality of accessibility, interaction with whether it's water or different features, so that you do have that momentum moving through. But it's also a great space to be. And so if you lived in a condo or an apartment or a townhome near there, that's a small space to go and have a cup of coffee without having to necessarily go to a larger park, but also gives you those connection points. Throughout the process for Town Center, we've heard loud and clear that it has to be more accessible for bikes and for pedestrians. And the multimodal system that is proposed through the community concept has both of those. It has the cycle track that has really, I think, morphed over time as we've talked to folks about what that looks like, to really being a defined feature that goes throughout Town Center and connects the major park and recreation elements, but also having wide sidewalks, safe streets to cross,
the ability to make multiple connections without having to walk through a parking lot. So those are the types of things we've thought about from a multimodal standpoint, in addition to be able to provide vehicle connections, because we know people are still going to continue to drive. So with that, we know, we've all been in Town Center. We know what it's like to drive through there. We were actually standing next to Town Center Park talking about our pop-up on August 22nd with the citywide barbecue that's coming up. And the number of cars going through Park Place was really surprising. They're using that cul-de-sac. They are getting through that space, and it's very busy. So it's starting to think about how we not necessarily regulate that traffic, but disperse the traffic so that it's not stuck specifically on Town Center Loop West, for example, which we know backs up every afternoon. So how do we start to distribute that traffic through a series of different streets, whether they be local or arterials or collectors, but really starting to think about it as a system as opposed to just a couple key connections. And an item Miranda brought up about Town Center Loop West, that's a connection we've talked a lot about. There's challenges with Town Center Loop West. One is that it's really close to the interchange. A lot of people use it to try and get onto I-5. It backs up. But there are a lot of other options too, and we looked at this in an initial traffic analysis on what if you change that organization of that road. So what if it were a smaller road? You still allowed that connection, but what if you started to try and get traffic to move to Town Center Loop East a little bit more, or use Main Street or some of the other connections so that you distribute that traffic more than having just that focal point on Town Center Loop West. And I know we'll talk more about this in terms of the grid and the block size that we're proposing, but really providing more options and also providing more local connections so those folks aren't stuck just on the arterials. And that's what you see on those gray dotted lines on the map. And just some examples, we've drawn some cross sections to show what that looks like. Park Place and Courtside are really the key streets from a pedestrian and a placemaking standpoint. But they're not all created equal. Park Place North, for example, has great potential for a walkable street connecting the north part of Town Center to the south. But also we know that the apartments are there and will not likely redevelop. So, acknowledging that and making sure that we have solid landscaping, making sure that, any impacts to them are mitigated. But going to other locations through Town Center, looking at, what do I have next? Sorry. Thank you. Town Center at Park Place, that intersection with the park and some of the other spaces, what if that were more of a curbless street that you could close off on a regular basis if you wanted to, that offers those options for it still, provides mobility, but it's also pedestrian friendly, but provides you a little bit more flexibility than the street that you have today. One of the biggest moves we have in this project is that Park Place extension. And that is really your key main street. Very active storefronts, on-street parking, wide sidewalks. It's really, this is the core of the walkable district right here. And so when you look at this cross-section, it's partly the street, but it's also the urban form adjacent to that street that's very important. And those are some of the questions we'll have later on. But it's really, supporting and invigorating that Main Street concept that's been very supported through the community. And then finally, Courtside. Courtside's a great connection, but really using that more, partly for placemaking as a part of that Main Street on the north side of the street, but also using that as a cycle track connection. So integrating the park, but also talking about some other mobility options there. And that Courtside becomes that central connection for the cycle track down to Memorial Park. So it's both a functional street, but as well a still pedestrian-focused street. And then finally, the local streets, which were the gray lines on the map, we provided a few different options. The top two are more traditional local streets. These are ones that would likely be constructed as a part of development, but likely privately funded, either on-street parking or bike lanes, depending on where you're at. The bottom option is what's called a Wunnerf, which is a much narrower street. Rather than defining exactly where cars go, you use a series of parking alleys. Pedestrians are often mixed with traffic. You see these in many urban areas where you're not you're really trying to slow down traffic and actually create a space that's much, much more unique than others. Downtown Portland has a few. Seattle is implementing a lot of these in some of their more suburban locations to create that space, particularly on older streets. So it's a different look, but one that has, we think applicability in some areas. So again, ideas for cross sections. And then finally, the land use map. Last time you saw this was a series of bubbles. It was talking about activity areas, commercial or recreation or housing. We've refined that to become much more of a zoning map, and we've renamed that. So MSD, which is the Main Street District, you'll see that is really that core node, if you will, where we're expecting, as development occurs, to be highly pedestrian oriented, really focused on the street, and our proposed design standards reflect that. Some of the other locations, like neighborhood mixed use, may not be as dense, more townhomes, other things that reflect the adjacent neighborhoods around it, but still very walkable. And then mixed use, which is more the brown or orangey color, depending on the print or the screen. That's kind of your traditional mixed use. There's a lot of different uses that could be in there. 2 to 4 stories, but again, buildings fronting to the street in most cases, really trying to make that grid, focus and be well used. And then finally, commercial mixed use, which is the highest density. At I-5, that's primarily office space. We heard loud and clear, don't put residential next to freeways, which we agree with. But potentially like where that promenade is, maybe allowing some type of mixed use or residential within that area, which is further away from the freeway. So definitely flexibility, but the goal really is activity and action. And part of that is having people in town center. And that's where the zoning comes from. That's the vision of the plan that we've heard loud and clear for the past couple of years. But doing that through activating streets, through parklets, and allowing, or requiring specific types of building placement so that you do get that solid street activity, but allowing people to recreate. Allowing different types and development densities. These are townhomes or walk-ups that are 2 to 3 story. These are the types of things that we might envision in the neighborhood mixed use or mixed use districts, this type of area. This is an example that we found really attractive. This is actually in Ogden, Utah. And, again, it's dense. This is 16 or so units per acre, 3 stories, but it's owner occupied, townhome style, parking in the rear with garages, but still a very attractive product that we could see within town center. And then some of the higher density uses, again, whether it's brick or glass or however it's designed, these are the types of commercial products that might fit within that CMU zone. Higher densities, 4 to 5 stories potentially, but really, if you're trying to provide a mix of uses in office, either employment or hotel or other types of things, providing attractive spaces for people, regardless of what's in the building, is the key, the key thing that's really important to take away with what we've been working with. And then finally, another example, this is a residential semi-mixed use project. You have residential access in the front. You have some retail on the corners, but notice the percentage of glass within this building. High percentage of glass, eyes on the street. When you think about these taller buildings and these boxes, the last thing you want is a wall of brick or a wall of wood. You really want that permeability and that visibility through glass or other features that makes it inviting. This is a good example too of small porticos within the buildings. So just different ideas and different scales that might be seen through town center. All right. So that's where we've been. Those are the elements that we've been carrying forward and continuing to refine with task force and community assistance. The next piece of this project is starting to get into the details a bit. And what we've been doing as a team and with city staff is starting to develop implementation strategies for town center. We have the general land use map, cross sections, where streets would go. The next step is really to start to develop that zoning and some of the site and building design guidelines. And we started this process with the task force back in June, asked several questions about key elements and priorities for what should go into those pieces. But the key focus is to come back to that goal of harmonious design. And that's something we've been talking about, and we've talked about Planning Commission and City Council on. One of the main tenets of this project is to have a town center that's beautiful, but that also has necessarily an eclectic style, but a style that has a high variety of different types of components. And when we started to develop the design guidelines, we came back to this immediately and looked at this goal for guidance. So I'm just putting it up there. I'm not going to read it. It's in all of the plans and documents. But this was our overarching feature that we looked at for guidance. There's major elements within the zoning and design guidelines. We are starting to look at what permitted and prohibited uses might be, building and street frontage requirements, site design standards, which includes parking, like how do you address parking within town center, which may be different than other parts of Wilsonville, building design standards and street connectivity. Those are some of the main elements that we're beginning to address, and we have some questions for you about many of those. So just as a preface, we have 6 questions, so we can keep track at home about how far we are along in the number of questions. Well, what I'd like to do is just to ask the question and then provide the input from what the task force gave us on that question. Not all of the questions, we didn't ask the task force all of these questions, so we've noted that if we haven't. But we'd just love to have a conversation to help provide us direction as we move forward. So one of our first questions, and I think we've talked about this even before we got into the last task force, the existing development code, from our analysis, is that it doesn't provide the framework that you need for developing the town center according to the vision. The question is how far do you go in terms of requirements versus guidelines? What type of, if you're requiring a really heavy set of standards, that could go down to brickwork, exact building locations, very specific points, which can work in some instances, but it can also be challenging in other locations. And so when we asked this of the task forces, how far do we take this? The answer was mixed, but the clear direction was that that should vary by location. And so if we're looking at these various areas within town center, Main Street was a location that the task force suggested might have the strongest design requirements, because that's really the focus and some of the biggest lifts that we're talking about through this process. But other areas might require greater flexibility. Maybe the commercial mixed use area does not have as strong of requirements, still has the guidelines and some of the standards that you want, but maybe it's less so than what Main Street is. And so that's a question for you as you get people to come in and, for review and permits, is what level of detail do you want to provide them and require of them for these specific types of uses? So I'll throw that to you.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first, sure. So I guess, at a high level, I'm, as part of the task force as well, I don't have any major disagreements with the task force recommendation. I think it does make sense to have a higher level of design requirements for Main Street versus the rest of the areas. Now, from my perspective, that doesn't mean that Main Street is prescriptive in every specific detail, but that there are higher expectations in terms of the type of design and the things that we would allow or not allow in that area.
I'm on the task force, so that was my understanding as well from the discussion we were having.
I guess I have a little bit of a different opinion on that, and I think it's based a little bit of living through Villebois and the development of Villebois and seeing where initially there were some very, I would say, more stringent standards and how that turned out and how it looked. And as time progressed and there weren't those more directive kinds of guidelines, that things don't look quite as good. And I guess I have a real concern about that. I mean, if we're creating a show place here, which, I mean, show place in the sense of we want people to want to come to the town center. We want them to come. If you allow it to kind of develop kind of with more guidelines, people tend to stretch those as far as they possibly can. And I think you lose a little of the character, you lose a little of the element of this overall look and feel. And I think, you know, as I sat through some of the initial meetings, that I heard a lot about the feel. You know, there's a sense of wanting it to feel like a community. We don't have a downtown area, and I think that's one of the drawbacks of Wilsonville. And I think there was a real strong need for that. Now, you know, how far, you know, all the way out to, but I think within that area, I guess I disagree. I think we need to have a little more stringent guidelines through the whole central core of this.
Is there a specific area in Villebois that you would say stands out as not being what you would have expected?
Mm-hmm. Several. Yeah, I think as time sort of developed, the initial standards of, you know, the pattern book idea, and it was very well adhered to initially, and as time marched on, it's not as adhered to. And so the look and feel, there was this kind of sense of what we wanted it, you know, the people who were involved with it wanted it to look and feel like, and I think that's sort of degraded a little bit. And that's my concern, because, you know, it got less stringent as time went on, and that's just based on my impression of it.
Yeah, and I guess my side from being on the Development Review Board that approved a good majority of the recent development in Villebois is that, you know, I think what you're seeing is a variety of different types, not necessarily that it doesn't still apply to the concepts that were there in the Villebois development, just that you're starting to see the different varieties of developments that were allowed under the development. And so, and maybe it's more of a not being happy with that from an aesthetic standpoint, which I can understand. It's all a matter of personal preference.
It is.
So I think that's a challenge that we're going to have to work through as a body to figure out that balance between allowing the freedom and catering to the different tastes.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. And I also understand that when you're trying to attract businesses to develop in an area, you can't, if you lay down the parameters too stringent, you're going to discourage, people to build there and to be part of it. But I guess initially, as we go into this, I'm going to stick with a little more feeling about being a little more directive on our, not guidelines so much, but more design standards.
Great, thank you.
Can you go back to one of the maps for me a second? One of the ones that has some of the lot line, that one's a little confusing. There we go. And the reason I asked for this is because one of the things that I'm trying to be really cognizant of in the entirety of this process is for this to be successful, right? There's this notion of land ownership, consolidation, phasing type of idea that has to be in the back of our mind throughout this process. And the reason I wanted to look there is because I'm trying to visualize in my head where Main Street and what that sort of ownership structure looks like along Main Street, right? Because if you've got a stringent standard that's going to then be applicable to multiple property owners that may be doing it at different times, that becomes a little less workable. And if I'm seeing that correctly, right, I mean, the general notion is that Main Street is mostly, at least on the east side, pretty consolidated ownership, right? When you get to the west side, it's a little bit less so, right? At least I'm seeing in the southern portion. Am I seeing that right there, Miranda?
Technically, you would still
That's not
only,
Maine.
so technically where that is located, you would still only have 2 owners.
Okay, so we actually do have a pretty good, okay.
And we, for this street plan, I mean, particularly for the larger projects, you know,
Yeah.
that would be a capital project or something of that nature, we tried very hard to avoid existing businesses.
Yeah.
You know, to really start to make, to be honest, some of the connections that are sort of almost there. The Main Street extension from Courtside South, we were looking at it today, and that's pretty much your drive aisle within that parking lot.
Okay.
The gray streets, those are more local streets that would likely be constructed as a part of development. And so those are ones that will, you know, kind of mimic the block pattern that we've been talking about, that it actually is I think it's question 3 or 4. But those are things that would be likely constructed as a part of private development, but it does provide that connectivity. So those are a little bit more, I think, you know, dependent on what that development comes in, that what you'd want to see. But still, the desire for a connection is strong there.
Okay, so at least on when it comes to Main Street, we probably have, because we're talking about 2 potential owners there, there's a little bit more, we at least have the freedom to be a little bit more stringent if we need to, because we expect that it's a little more consolidation than we see in some of these other places where there's a lot more lot lines and ownership, right? Okay.
That's correct. And I'd even say the extension of Courtside is just a handful of owners as well, too. So that's the purple dotted line going to the west as well. So those big moves do have relatively few landowners, which is nice and unusual.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, thank you for indulging me with the map again.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so could you go to the proposed zoning map, please? 19, I think. Yeah. So related to your question, are we talking about a more prescriptive zoning within what's called here the Main Street District, MSD, the purple zone? And then that's really what we're talking about?
Yeah, that was the recommendation from the task force. So one of the questions we have is whether or not the Planning Commission agrees that the MSD might have higher requirements or have more requirements, but be not as loose or flexible. The task force didn't feel like there needed to be as high of standards, or I guess I don't want to say as high of standards, but as rigid of standards in like the MU mixed use, the neighborhood mixed, or the commercial mixed use. Still wanted high level of design, still wanted to make sure we were putting in design guidelines or maybe some standards, but maybe not as many. But we're recommending that Main Street District is a very, very important place and central feature of this plan, and wanted to, I think, be a little bit more regulatory in that location. And please correct me if I misinterpreted that or phrased it.
No, it's not correction or changing what you said, it's highlighting what you said. The concern, if I remember correctly, was in a lot of new urbanism, you end up doing a Disney kind of a thing. It's what Disney. It's what old downtown looked like kind of a thing, and it's hokey, it's just fake. The idea was to make sure that the creativity of the owners and their architects are not stunted by a bunch of short-sighted, and by short-sighted I mean really time-wise short-sighted, because a lot of our preferences don't age well. So something that looks very nice now in 15 years looks, who came up with this idea? So we were trying to make sure that the design was authentic. And so the guidelines were supposed to really be qualitative almost, getting designers and architects to look at the motivation that the community has and the hopes and ideals that it has for this area, which is what you were talking about. And highlight those and come up with their creative ways of achieving it. So at least that's what I was, maybe I'm just delusional about what development will be like, but that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I think that That's exactly right, and that's what the task force was talking about. When we put together the design guidelines, particularly for Main Street, there's that balance between a heavy regulatory hand on this building shall be wood with brick with, X. The way we establish the guidelines now is really about building placement, percentage of glass at the ground floor, where building entrances should be, and to be honest, weather covering. Weather covering is a big deal, and it's something we've heard over and over again. So with those, that places your building where you want it to be, provides some direction about permeability and visibility through the building, but leaves it to the architect or designer to, interpret what that might be. And that's, I think, the question, how far do we take that regulation versus standard? I think the key thing for Main Street is location of parking and location of the building. Those are the two major elements for Main Street.
So parking, in general, the concept is to put parking behind buildings in the Main Street district, or along the streets itself, right, on-street parking. But so we're not talking about having centralized parking for all districts, but perhaps smaller centralized parkings for each individual district or groups of, or something like that. Like parking lots behind buildings in this case, in the case of Main Street district.
Yeah, and I think you'll see with other locations like Belmar in Lakewood, Colorado, which is it's a new urbanist development, but I think they've done a good job of creating a Main Street, not dissimilar to what we're looking at here. They have centralized their parking, but they've done it in ways that they're connecting adjacent parking lots. So you may have parking behind the buildings. It could be multiple landowners, but you could have requirements that those parking areas are connected, so that you're not chomping up each of those spaces in the back. And that's I think, a way that you can get to the development type you want at a more incremental level, as opposed to you have a master developer who's going to come in and do your entire Main Street for you. But yes, parking is behind the buildings or on the street. Whether it's structured, tuck under, I think that's up to the developer or even the city to decide how to handle that.
And we actually have a question about parking tonight as well.
The last question.
The last question, if we get there.
Yeah. Is it, this design requirement for Main Street, is it, do I say, it kind of feels like you're talking about a form-based code, or, I mean.
Yeah, I think there's
is that what we're moving towards?
There is that balance between form-based code and design standards. I think form-based code often gets away from, pure form-based code often gets away from the prohibited or permitted list, which is sometimes hard to deal with if you're doing a development application. There's really just stuff you don't want within that. What we're recommending is to go more of a balanced or a hybrid approach of having a series of more traditional code elements, but then have those design standards, which, to be honest, yes, are similar to what a form-based code might look like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So are you thinking that hybrid of for all of the area, or for just the kind of around the purple, the Main Street area? Obviously you've given some thought to this, and.
Yeah, I think building location is one that is likely more flexible depending on where you're at. Main Street, you probably want to be more stringent on that because you really want to have that strong pedestrian orientation. If you're talking about larger office buildings or, mixed-use residential that's not on a Main Street, maybe there's more flexibility in exactly what those forms look like. But I think the key piece in the overarching vision, particularly with the harmonious design, is to develop something that's pedestrian-oriented, that is easy to get around, and that as a pedestrian, the building is inviting. And there's a number of ways you can do that and a number of different kind of levels you can regulate that. But I think you could do that in different ways, depending on what district you're in.
So kind of holding those strong tenets of pedestrian friendly, et cetera, and having those universal through all the areas, but maybe a little more prescriptive in the central area.
Right.
But still there's some key, I guess there's some key concepts that we never deviate from, you know, pedestrian-friendly,
Exactly, exactly.
yeah, offsets, those kinds of things. And those are standardized, and then a little more prescriptive elements to the main area.
That's correct. And, you know, for like the CMU area, potentially, maybe parking is allowed behind and on the side of the building, whereas in Main Street would only be allowed behind the building. So I think there's some flexibility depending on where you're at.
So in time management, I feel like we've gotten some good input on that one, and there's some cohesion among the commission. I would propose we move to question 2.
So the next question, and this is a esoteric question sometimes about block length. Currently, right now, the city of Wilsonville implements the metro standard of a 530-foot block frontage. That is a really long block if you think about urban areas, even other suburban areas. That's a long distance to travel. We're recommending something not as dense from an intersection standpoint as downtown Portland, which is 200-foot blocks and has, you know, you couldn't construct that today for what it was, but to go with a 400-foot block distance. But also within that, require that there is some pedestrian connectivity through that block. 400 feet, that's a typical block length. It's one that can support larger development if necessary, but also allow on-site parking. But it should be balanced with strong pedestrian access through that site. And so we do have some guidelines within what we're proposing is within every 250 feet, you do have pedestrian accessibility through the site. And that can be done through a building. It can be done, you know, through the parking lot, but it does need to be identified and demarcated. I like to use this graphic just to talk about what block width and structures are. When we talk about, you know, block length, you know, Portland has one of the smallest blocks in the country, which is great if you're a pedestrian. It's challenging if you're a developer, particularly a modern developer. It's also very expensive if you're talking about infrastructure to be able to build those roads. The benefit of a block structure like that is that it's very easy as a pedestrian to make choices, and also vehicles to make choices on how to get around. And so it's the balance between that versus like Salt Lake City, which is the really big block on the far right. And if you've ever been to Salt Lake City and walk through it, it takes forever to get around any place. And many of those blocks aren't broken down, so it's hard to get through. So I bring this up because, one, there is no magic bullet in terms of block width and length. The key piece for this, though, is to provide you know, what we think is the best alternative for town center based on its existing development pattern, what could be constructed realistically, both on the public and private side, but also provide that strong pedestrian connectivity. And just as an example, this is Orenco Station. If you've ever been there, New Seasons, I believe, is on the left side there. I think this is a great example of that modern block structure. And I'm going to point out a few things. Essentially from right-of-way to right-of-way from Brighton to Cornell, that's about 400 feet. That's about what you're looking at. If you notice that east-west connection, that's about 250 feet. So you have those two linear buildings, north-south. Then you have that east-west connection about that provides access to parking. It also starts to split some of the buildings because also monolithic buildings can be very challenging. But then the thing I like about this is that this is a nice precedent image for what Main Street could be. Parking to the back, you have a strong pedestrian orientation, not large buildings, 3-story-ish buildings, but still providing, you know, all of the amenities that you need for a modern town center. This took a long time to develop, so it's not something that happened overnight, but it's a good example, I think, of that strong form that kind of balances the need for access versus pedestrian orientation and block size. And you can buy a live-work unit just up to the north there. So questions, comments? What about the block length?
I say yes on the shorter. Yeah, 530 seems long, considering what we're trying to build. 400 seems long, but I see what you're saying, though, if you break it up with, either pedestrian crosswalks or access to parking, which then serves the need of putting the parking behind the buildings like we're talking about, right? So, okay.
Yeah, and I think that's critical if you go with that length, is to have that accessibility,
Yeah.
additional accessibility.
The mid-block pedestrian access, does it make sense for for these to be multimodal access? I mean, or is that, you're going to keep the bikes in the Main Street area, right? We're talking about Main Street. No, we're talking about the whole, the blocks is the whole,
Right.
whole town center area. In some places, we're going to have bike paths, right, that are so these could be in amongst the.
Sure, I don't know that they would be marked, but they would certainly be accessible. I think the key piece with that pedestrian access is that you could combine that with parking access, as provided it's designed to accomplish that. The nice thing about that too is that you can share the access. So it's removing curb cuts essentially, which is better for bicycles and pedestrians, and really focusing on those 200 or 250 foot connections between the buildings.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking. The curb cuts is a big piece of that. If you say purely pedestrian access, then you're going to have curbs, and you're not going to be able to get bikes through there without buckling wheels.
Right, it would definitely need to be designed to be safe for all modes, but consolidating that access as much as possible to parking, so you don't have cars coming in and out in all directions. That's important.
And it's critical that the parking lots not become throughways,
Yes.
Yeah.
as in the current, parking lot over here.
Right.
The Evenco Station photograph, there's a lot of parking there.
There is.
Is that parking purely to cover those buildings that we also see? Or is that parking intended to support more buildings?
I believe so. I don't know what the percentage or what the ratio that they used to develop that was, but those buildings are surface parked, and there are the small buildings behind on the north of the townhomes. That's covered parking for those townhomes, but all the apartments within those larger buildings, I believe that's all surface parking. Also for New Seasons and others, which are higher generators. So it's a mix of residential as well as the commercial.
Yeah, just from this view, it does look like a lot of asphalt. I'm just hoping for something greener.
Well, and that's a question for, actually question 6.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm okay with it at 400 feet.
Great.
I'm okay with it too. My concern is that your mid-block pedestrian accesses, if not designed well, are not going to be defensible spaces. And at night, they're going to be not where people want to use as a thoroughfare, on foot anyway.
So maybe there are some design requirements for those.
Lighting would be important, highlighting that this is a public path, even though it's going through a public or a private parking, would be, I think all of those need to be there. And maybe some activities, I don't know, maybe that's where you want some of your vendor carts or something for.
No, that's a great idea.
You need to have some other activity there that is a stable activity, so people who are transitioning through are not going through no man's land.
I agree with that. These should not look like institutional parking lots.
Great point, thank you.
Are we good on this question?
Yes.
All right.
So we had shown some of the proposed cross-sections on the plan, and these cross-sections have been refined since the task force. We've made them more attractive and refined some of the pieces. We discussed generally those connections with task force, but we didn't talk specifically about the cross-section, what they look like. Generally speaking, they're about a 60-foot cross-section. The Voonarf is slightly smaller at, I believe, 52 or 54 feet. But what we had tried to do for all of these is to make sure there's wide sidewalks, 12-foot sidewalks on all locations, depending on where you're at on street parking or bike and ped facilities. But again, it's really trying to get that multimodal connection as well as that pedestrian, adequate pedestrian space moving forward.
So and this is a great picture because I wanted to ask to go back to this anyway, so I think this is a perfect time for it. My concern, I guess, with this, the way it's shown is the inconsistency of the bike ped as you go north and south along Park Place and the extension where, you know, on North Park Place you have you know, bike lanes on both sides, and then you transition to Park Place at Town Center Park where you've got a buffered bike lane cycle track on one side. And so that means that at each of those transition points, you're going to have people, families, children, transitioning a street. And, you know, from my perspective, the more you can minimize those transitions, the better. And so I picked up on that right away in terms of the inconsistency in terms of how the people would flow specifically through that street area.
That's a great observation. We could cover why it ended up that way from what we had heard from people. That doesn't mean that we're still moving forward with the project though and further refining. But part of that was that concept of the cycle track really coming from the bridge down Main Street and then along the southern part of the park to then connect south to Memorial. And so that is how that sort of the cycle track got prioritized to take that route and not necessarily feeds straight south as well. There is, I think the other thing is that with the redesign of traffic flow on Wilsonville Road, the intersection at Main Street has full, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm at a loss.
You can go everywhere.
Well,
That's right.
Right, you can go any direction. There is some limited flow of direction on Town Center Loop West. And then we're also, the long-term, a lot of support we heard through the community was for a lot of the pedestrian and bike activity to go on Rebecca because at that intersection, because of the direct flow south to the library and having that be not as, it's not a full sort of vehicular traffic flow, and so it felt safer to people.
Going where?
So there's let me see if I can find a better map. This one will work. Canyon Creek eventually sort of extends south and would cross at where there's an existing traffic light at Rebecca. It becomes Rebecca to the south of Wilsonville Road.
Okay.
Sort of on the west side of the library. And so we had heard a lot of support through the project that there was a desire to bring most of the pedestrian and bike traffic to the Town Center Loop West intersection because that's going to be redesigned and have some limited turning mobility to cars in order sort of in this future plan. And also part of that is so that we can provide better bike and pedestrian connectivity than we have today, because currently we don't have full pedestrian connectivity at that intersection. And so in order to do that, it would sort of modify some of that traffic flow and how the different intersections along Wilsonville Road are handled in the long term. That brought some interest in then focusing pedestrian and bike connectivity north and south of Wilsonville Road to Town Center Loop West and Rebecca. And so there it is, I would agree with your observation though, that it makes it, there are these sort of points that could be awkward for bike and pedestrian activity because in some ways what's been prioritized so far by the community is sort of this diagonal connection across. And then sort of splitting off in two ways, one down to Loop West and south and one down Rebecca and south. And that may not be where we want sort of the final version of the connectivity to occur in this plan. But that's where, sort of how we got to where we are today.
And you could, that, we were thinking about particularly Park Place north of Town Center Park, where, you have the connection coming kind of northwest to southeast. Rather than doing bike lanes on the street, you do a cycle track that continues up to Town Center Loop to continue that. That is certainly a possibility to just continue that up. I think the question we had is, where do you make the transition? Because there's existing bike lanes on Parkway north of Town Center Loop West, or I guess that's the confluence between east and west. You could certainly make that transition there and continue cycle track north. I think the question, and it's a good one for Main Street, is how large do you make that street? Particularly the extension moving from Wilsonville Road up to Town Center Park. We went with on-street parking and, wide sidewalks, and you could certainly add bike lanes to that, but it's just more right of way to do that. So we chose to use other roads. Certainly bikes could share traffic with that slow traffic street, but we tried to route, if you're gonna go through on a bike, maybe that's not the best street to do it. If you're trying to get to a business on Main Street, then you share it with the slow traffic. But that's a great point. Those transitions, they need to be effective, and maybe there's a better way to look at them.
Yeah, and I guess we're not going to solve it here tonight. So I just, as we continue to get through this process and refine it, just, make sure we're looking at it from that perspective as well, so that we don't create a hodgepodge of transitions that are forcing people to do more things than they really need to.
Sounds like a good task force question moving forward.
At the same time, I don't think we would want to have a street so wide and complex that it divides Town Center into two distinct districts.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you could very easily, like the existing Park Place moving north from Town Center Park, I think that'd be an easy transition to go to cycle track or bike lane, like because the space is there and that's not really the energy is, but that Main Street extension south, I think we want to be cognizant of what that ultimate cross-section looks like.
I think the real burden of, if it is a burden, of the Main Street district is to establish most clearly the sense of place for Town Center. And that's a heavy burden design-wise, but it would certainly be made more difficult if that street becomes too heavy in traffic.
Yeah. And that's one reason why it's very narrow, not narrow, 10-foot lanes, on-street parking. We expect a lot of pedestrian activity, so definitely people going through it. But if you're going through to get through to Town Center, Main Street is not the one we want you to go on. We want you to go on Town Center Loop East, to be honest, so.
Next question.
So did we have any other comments on this one? Or people generally feel like there might be a few more issues to work out in terms of consistency and transitions, but otherwise these cross sections generally feel like what we've heard through the process and the locations of them?
I think these transitions are a design challenge, but they're a challenge at each point. They have to be resolved in terms of what's there and how we want it to function.
Thank you. So the next question, we've actually, I think, discussed this somewhat. We've done a lot of survey work with the community about using those precedent images that we've been talking about. And I think the question that we're starting to grapple with is, do we recommend or require specific building materials versus having more the general standards of building placement, location, general qualities? But it's an important issue because Town Center does have the red brick facade, for example, that's prevalent in some of the buildings. Is that a continuation? But getting to Cameron's question, how far do you take it so that you don't get Disneyland? So that's, we would love some guidance on how far you think we should take those design guidelines, specifically for building materials.
I actually favor more eclecticism in the final result. This is going to take a long time to develop in the first place. And we're starting from an established, built area, and I don't see it as, we don't have the opportunity that they had, say, at Bridgeport Village, where they started out tabula rasa and could do an integrated design. And they did a good job of it. I don't especially like it, and I don't want to replicate it in town center. I prefer more architectural variety, as long as it's not glaringly inconsistent.
And I forgot to mention, that's generally where task force landed, is, articulation of buildings, so that there's breaks in buildings or, change in plane. But, it was kind of, for the most part, people wanted that variation, but some people did want more of the stronger standards.
I think that businesses might very well prefer to have some distinction in their architecture.
I think the housing units also would want to be unique.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
So it sounds like a similar approach to what we've done elsewhere is that we might prohibit a few things, but, and then look at articulation, but allow a lot of flexibility in terms of precise materials.
Yeah.
Correct. Great.
Are we going to talk about weather protection, since you had it on a bullet there?
Sure.
We need it. That's been very clear. So, any buildings, particularly entrances, but also, along Main Street, maybe there's, stronger weather protection if you want people out and about. So, marquee awnings are historic for a lot of main streets that go across the entire front of the building. Maybe in other areas like the CMU or mixed use, you only need it on the entrances. So those are some things that we're working through right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we highlighted that, because that was a key thing from the task force, is having that year-round use and that weather protection being a critical thing, especially for the Main Street area, and having a continuous weather-protected pathway from one place to another.
Thank you, yes. All right. So we have a couple that the task force didn't really discuss, but have come up through various conversations. The question of whether or not we should restrict or permit one-story commercial buildings within town center. That there are some very successful main streets or business districts that have one-story buildings, provided they're well designed. The goal, though, is to have more life within town center. I think the question for Planning Commission is everything in town center right now is single story. And so what direction makes the most sense for that? If we regulate it so that it's 2 or more stories on Main Street, that could extend development times. If it's single story, are there specific recommendations that we should consider for design standards for those? So that's something we had talked about. The other piece is, should you limit the scale of retail uses? Fry's, for example, is about 100,000 square feet. Is that too big for an area? From what we've discussed from the community and others, that it's not so much the size of a business, it's more the floor plate size. So could you have a Fry's that's 3 stories that has the same amount of square footage, but the max floor plate is 30,000 square feet, for example, which is like Trader Joe's in Hollywood. It's about that size. So I guess there's 2 questions there. Do you allow single-story buildings? And the other is, do you limit the size of square footage for retail or commercial space?
I'm not a big fan on limitation on either of them. We still have to let the market figure out what it can build. So you put too much limitation on it, and I don't know, it seems like a recipe to me to maybe never get built.
I think that one-story commercial buildings are fine. I don't see any issues with that. And possibly you might want to look at that main core purple area again in terms of limiting the amount of retail, the size, but not in the other pieces. Okay. I think you got to let it develop. But you know, I think it might be worth considering, and I'm not saying we absolutely, you know, nail it down, but, should consider limiting the amount of size of the retail space in the purple main zone, or maybe even, segment that and say, in this section, you know, we kind of want it to be a little smaller scale, and then.
No big box stores.
I can buy that.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that makes sense. I mean, if you're not going to limit it on that main street, then
Yeah, then other.
you're never going to get what you're trying to get. But I guess my point is that proximity to some sort of anchor is maybe the determining factor as to whether some of these things can work. And that doesn't necessarily mean you want to park a new Fry's on Main Street, but, you know, if you've got a Trader Joe's one block over, it can still work. In my mind, I'm still holding to this notion that I've heard from some experts on that it's really dangerous to say you're going to limit it to a point where you're prohibiting an anchor tenant of sorts.
Okay. Point taken.
I will buck the trend. I'm sensitive to the market concerns that Commissioner Postma is concerned about. To me, there is a danger in undervaluing a resource. And if we're trying to make this into a gem of a downtown area, we need to treat it as a gem. A one-story development is a total waste of that resource. So I would have FAR requirements and definitely no one-story development. I mean, we're talking mixed use, you know, on the face of it, a one-story development is going to buck that in most cases. And I would wait. I mean, if somebody isn't willing to do at least two-story or whatever multiple story we're talking about, and say, don't develop until the market is right to do it right. And I've seen that work. Madison had to wait on the main thoroughfare, Washington Avenue, for almost 12 years before mixed-use, really well-designed development happened in lots that were parking lots for car dealerships. And market had to catch up with it, basically. It was an idea that was too ahead of its time. But the resource would have been completely wasted and postponed that development for probably another 50 years until they got dilapidated enough to get thrown away. And that's what I don't think we can afford to do in town center.
I completely concur. One of the impetuses for redeveloping town center is to make better use of that real estate. Currently, it is largely wasted. This is very valuable town center location, and we're wasting it, you know, tragically, I think, in our current town center development. At the time, it didn't seem like a waste because there was plenty of space, hardly any population, but that's not the case today, and that is, we're moving away from that. That's the whole purpose of, or much of the purpose of the redevelopment.
Great, thank you.
And I'll clarify, because I actually agree with Commissioner Mesbah on one point, and that is that I'm okay with the notion of if the market doesn't think it can sustain it because it doesn't, and waiting for it to catch up with what we want. I'm okay with that notion. If that choice is, you know, maybe we got to wait a little bit longer to get it closer to what we want. I'm okay with that notion. But I also just trying to be sensitive, like you said, is that if we're too restrictive, the market may just tell us we're never going to build it. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. But I'm trying to keep that balance as well of let's make it look like what we want. I'm just terrified of being so prescriptive that we are, that the market will just ignore us.
I guess I would say just one quick, from a task force perspective and from the community feedback we've received, I don't think from all the things that I've looked at, there's been any real push from the community or from the task force to say, let's put single-story commercial in any of the town center. I mean, all the survey results are saying, multi-story. So I don't see any reason to change what seems to be a fairly good public consensus.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I also have the consensus with, I think one story is what we have now, and yes, it was less dense, but if we're going to replan and we want a more vibrant, busy centre, it's got to be multi-story. I think certainly in the Main Street district, it needs to be at least 2 stories, but maybe it makes sense. It really makes sense to me in the whole of town centre to require redevelopment of multi-stories.
Well, let me ask this question though, because I'm thinking just because it's easier to think in terms of a specific, like a Trader Joe's type of concept that is kind of anchor-ish, but not real large. I mean, on the outskirts, not in that Main Street district, would we really be opposed to one like that was well-designed, it was technically single-story? Because it fits the character of what we're trying to do. And I just throw that out there as an example of something that would work and still fit what we're trying to build. And are we doing ourselves a disservice by being so prescriptive that it doesn't become the option?
It would certainly work if you built residential on top of that Trader Joe's.
I have developers that would disagree with that, but I understand what you're saying.
I think what direction I've heard though is that Main Street, multiple, more than 1 story for sure. But I'm hearing a little bit of uncertainty on some of the other areas potentially. Are there locations where we would allow single story or are we requiring multiple stories in all locations?
Yeah, my internal debate is that this town center area is huge. And so being prescriptive that this entire, how many acre area?
100.
That's really large. I mean, to say that there can't be any single story in 100 acres, I'm not sure I'm for that. I think Main Street, area is a definite, and we should probably think some more about.
So one piece that we have been working on and that is still in draft form, and we had some initial results at the task force but haven't shared with the full planning commission, is some development feasibility analysis. And that's been updated and is being a fairly polished draft is being completed now, and we intend to share with you in October. And so I think for tonight's purposes, the direction we've received is good. I think it's clear for Main Street. I think that when we bring back that development feasibility analysis to you, that might help inform your discussion on this from the dialogue I'm hearing. And we can look more specifically at sort of the other districts, particularly probably the mixed use and the neighborhood mixed use, to see what you'd maybe want to do in those districts. So I would propose that. I think that we got good direction here, and we can, in order to present something back to you in October.
And we have at least toyed with, if not adopted, the general principle of increasing massing toward the highway.
Correct.
And so if we end up with single-story buildings, the most logical place would be in the neighborhood mixed use.
Okay. Now, this is a really big topic, and I believe we have hit the time frame that Town Center Work Session had on your agenda. So, and I want to be respectful of the other folks in the room and your time.
Thank you.
So what I would say here is that we can put this question on the topic the next time we come back to you in October. But what I would like is that if you have very strong thoughts already, you've already thought about parking in Town Center, your ideas for the location of that, or ideas around different solutions you've thought of. At a very high level, if you want to share that with us tonight, then we know to bring that type of information back to you in October, not necessarily as the solution, but as information to inform the dialogue and discussion.
I've not been attending any of the task force meetings, but from what is percolating out from them, I'm very much of a mind, I think, with what's going on in those meetings.
So I think just a couple quick notes. I think some considerations moving forward. We did do a very high-level parking analysis of the area, and some of parking in the area is heavily used, and a lot of it is not. And so, like with areas that have more disconnected parking areas, like in the southwest corner, those are pretty occupied and active. Fry's has some excessive parking. The theater has some, excess parking. The northeast corner does as well. So there is certainly some parking use, but how we characterize it, there's not really a parking problem within town center. I think some key considerations moving forward, though, as we look at this, are your current parking standards, and if we introduce mixed use into town center. Currently, you don't have mixed use parking standards. There are also some smaller business exemptions that you don't have within your code, like small scale retail or restaurants less than, say, 3,000 or 5,000 square feet. Can they just use the on-street parking in front of their space rather than having to provide that to the back or a side of the building? A lot of other jurisdictions, Tigard, Hillsborough are good examples of ones that I think have interesting standards to look at. Tigard has really gone to the zero minimum standard and allowing the market, frankly, to decide how much parking they want to build. Downtown Hillsborough actually uses a lot of planning director discretion for level of parking. But overall, they're mostly going to a per unit as opposed to per bedroom basis for residential. They have a variety of standards for mixed use or mixed types of tenanted buildings where they use a graduated system as opposed to Wilsonville that counts up all the potential uses within a business and then requires that much parking. So there's some things to consider, I think, as we move into the implementation standpoint of how we do parking in town center, knowing that it's a different type of development than Wilsonville has typically had. So there'll be more discussion on that, but those are some things just to think about as we move forward on that. So do you want to?
I just wanted to say, is there anything high level or like information that you would like from us when we bring this back to you in order for you to better have that conversation?
I've just been thinking about, mixed use, commercial, residential, or business residential, or business commercial mixed use for that matter. Does that really reduce the net need for parking because of time sharing, or does that not work in practice? So maybe some examples where that has been tried, and whether it or not it's effective for mixed use buildings, reducing the net required parking.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
Slightly related, more on the transportation side. We have not had a chance to talk about the alignment on Town Center Loop West. I think that is an important thing that we should be discussing, and a potential wasted opportunity with the alignment that it has right now. So I would like to be able to have that conversation at some point.
Okay.
Thank you.
And although it's not within the design here, but the other side of the pedestrian bicycle path, on the other side of I-5, I'm just kind of curious, there's not a lot of space there, and Boones Ferry Road is very, people drive very fast, it's very crowded, and I'm just kind of, there's not a lot of space in there, and I'm just kind of wondering if there's been some thought as to what's going to happen to the other side of the bridge.
I was wanting to make a similar comment because it seems to me that the bridge has walked to the south from where it was drawn on earlier maps that I've seen.
The bicycle
The bicycle
pedestrian
I-5.
bridge?
Yeah, the I-5 bike pedestrian bridge.
So we originally, well,
It's now clearly south. Go for the multimodal.
it hasn't
map.
moved very far, but it,
Yep.
There you go.
wait, you want the multimodal?
Yeah.
One too far. So originally, the corner property was marked with a big kind of park potentially at that corner property in green, and the bridge was coming straight into that corner property.
You mean, Les Schwab? You mean corner property, Les Schwab?
Across from Les Schwab, across Loop West.
Oh, the vacant lot, right?
Correct. That has come through for a development application with the city during this process.
Wow.
So we have just marked the potential bridge location at this time, kind of at the boundary line, which is what we often do, thinking that we might look at right-of-way on sort of each, along that boundary line, a little bit from each parcel. So at this point, it's moved a little bit south, but not very far south.
I mean, this came up last time we had Smart in the room, because one of the things that we heard earlier on, especially also in the discussion about Denver, was that this kind of crossing could be a catalyst for development on either side of the bridge, and that section of Barber Street at the end, as it comes towards Bloomsbury Ferry Road, is probably also ripe for redevelopment. There's some large companies on the south side and much smaller buildings on the north side of Barber Street there. So the opportunity, the opportunity for cross-town connectivity is important here, as well as the opportunity to catalyze further development adjacent to town centre. So I think we need to make sure that connection works properly on both sides of the freeway.
And I would add to the transit center too. I mean,
Yes.
if you're really trying to build an area where people don't have to use their car, if you got the transit mall, and then you can walk over or use scooters or whatever, and crossed over to the main area. So, you know, that whole.
Well, that's certainly something we could put in the plan as a guideline for that bridge design and access. Yeah, because it is important to make a connection more than just to the end of the bridge. So you know, while we're not designing that side of I-5, certainly have an item in there that it has to provide that connectivity, you know, for future guidance for the bridge design.
Well, and once this project wraps up, or towards the end of this project, the design work for that bridge actually will begin in early to spring of 2019. And so we can take these recommendations, put them in the plan, and that can inform the design work that will be done. So I do want to sort of be cognizant of time. I would love to hear your ideas for the next 3 hours, but we all would like to go home at some point. So to give you a sense of where this fits in terms of our flow and our next steps is to revise the draft code design standards and guidelines based on your input. We'll work through this again with task force, and we'll be developing a draft plan and implementation strategies for you, which you'll be getting kind of in phases. We'll see you again in October and November, I believe. And so we'll be bringing more pieces back to you. I would say if you have more, like we didn't go through word for word of the code because thought this more overall
Because I'm the only one that
direction would be better.
cares, is that what you want to say?
If you have thoughts on the specifics, please email them to me. I really would like to integrate your whatever direction and comments and edits you have, the earlier the better, to get us further along in the process faster. So, question.
When you have that market feasibility study, do you expect it's going to be in advance of the next time we're looking at this in October? Like, will it be done in September?
Yeah,
Should
actually.
we get that sooner, in other words, to kind of be processing that before we get the?
That would be my hope. I just received the revised draft, and so, and I think I'm waiting on one more piece, but my hope would be that we can make it through a revision of that, or maybe it's even ready based on when I review it, to be able to share that with all of you and with some of our other partners. Our hope is to have some type of economic summit or some type, I don't know what it's going to be called, but some type of, we have kind of another event that's targeted towards the business community and thinking about like the feasibility, development opportunities based on the plan. And we're trying to figure out when that'll occur, and we're hoping that occurs in the fall as well. And so we want to have that out in people's hands and have an opportunity for them to look at that in
That's why,
advance of that.
and that's why I asked that from the business community side. It's a little bit harder to get quick input on those sorts of
Yeah.
things. And I know, I'm sure, probably sure you're thinking about talking to Kevin when that time comes up with the chamber for that. And I just know it's.
We're hoping they'll help us put the event on again.
I will do what I can to help you out with that process. It's just, it takes longer for that community to digest information like that. And that's why I'm asking, the sooner that we have that, I obviously don't push, but the sooner we have that and can digest it, it'd be easier.
Yeah.
I think it would be very good if we had a short informational item on our September agenda.
Okay. I will actually be absent for your September agenda, but I'm sure somebody else on the project team could do that for you.
Great.
At least share the document if it's ready.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you take your seat at the other table. We have a final matter for consideration tonight, the Smart Programs Enhancement Strategy. I was present when you presented at council.
Oh, okay, good, good. So, good evening, Chairman Greenfield, members of the commission. My name is Dwight Brashear. I'm the Proud Transit Director for SMART, and joining me this evening is our Transit Management Analyst, Nicole Hendricks, and to her left is Eric Loomis, who is our Operations Manager. And we're going to try to be as brief as we can, try to get through this in 5 minutes, and then we'll adjourn as according to the agenda. That is our goal. I will not explain what HB 2017 is. I think it's in the staff report, and so hopefully you are okay with the understanding of that. What has happened since last we met was TriMet had established a timeline for delivery of the project lists that all of the recipients, TriMet being the qualified entity, and so they really are the controlling entity, if you will, and we are a subrecipient of TriMet. So TriMet had established a timeline by which all of the other subrecipients, which include SMART, were to follow. And so we were before you in June, I believe it was, with a project list, and we reviewed that. We talked about that. Well, about maybe a month or so ago, in a meeting, it was discovered that the timeline that TriMet had established for delivery of the project list so that we could receive funding was inconsistent with the timeline that ODOT had established, and it took them that long, both sides, to figure out that there was an inconsistency. We actually, I think, tried to point that out to them, and we thought that they would make a correction, but it didn't happen until recently. Last Thursday and Friday, it was confirmed for me by TriMet and then by ODOT that the timeline had been, well, ODOT's timeline was a timeline that we should all follow. And so we had to shift gears. We had to be flexible. In 2017, this group approved, I should say, our Transit Master Plan. And that plan was budget neutral, as you recall. However, being the geniuses that we are, we had Appendix B, which was if money wasn't an object, what type of projects would we like to do here in Wilsonville and outside? And so finding that that plan met all of the requirements of HB 2017, we quickly pulled that plan out of the TMP, took it to the city council. We put some numbers to it and asked the city council to please amend the TMP, at least as it relates to Appendix B. And they graciously did that on July 2nd. We formed a committee for Clackamas County for all the small providers, and they somehow appointed me the chairman of that committee. I'm not sure why they did that, but in any event, through 2 meetings, we were able to get 5 project lists, the plans for each one of the providers through. And so we are prepared to submit that plan, which is Appendix B, which was already approved by this board, this commission, and also went through 2 years of public outreach. And so we feel very comfortable with that plan. However, that being said, the plan that we brought before you in June, we want to keep that plan moving. It's a more robust plan. It also will allow us, because there are a total of 4 pots of money, it will allow us to go after those other 3 pots of money, because it will also be part of an adopted plan. And so that's what has gotten us to this point. That's why we're back before you, and we wanted to provide you with some updates on some of the public outreach. Nicole's going to talk about some of the public outreach that we've done and the results of the public outreach.
Hi, everyone. So we came to you in June, like mid-June, when the survey was going. So we provided some partial public comment results. So I just wanted to check back in and do the full public comment results. The survey itself was 7 questions total. It was pretty brief, actually. The draft project list that we brought to you originally was, we grouped projects together so that people didn't have to prioritize so many different projects in one. So for example, there was a question on there that said, instead of enhanced services, it was broken out into van pool services, bike share, that kind of stuff. So we merged it into just enhanced programs for ease of use for the surveyor. And so they had rankings for each project, and we had a total of 159 responses for the month, and an average time of completion was 48 seconds. And then from that survey list, we asked for if people were interested in project updates and meeting notices that we'd send them. So so that's from the survey. And then the results in priority order, most people just really want those new destinations. And so this could be in addition to current services. For example, the 2X currently exists, but it could go to Tigard instead, or things like that. Or Portland was the top destination. And then there were also desires for Oregon City service, service to Woodburn and Hillsborough. And those are in that priority order. And then the highlighted sentences next to it are specific quotes from survey respondents who chose that as their top priority. So for Portland, I won't read them for sake of time, but the no out-of-town fares, someone said that they wanted that as their top priority, and the reason was because they ride both TriMet and SMART every day, and the costs add up for them. But clearly, out of this prioritized list, a lot of folks are willing to pay for more service because the no out-of-town fares scored the lowest for the public. But then, as you can see, there was requests for more weekday service, more weekend service. That included Sunday service, increased frequency of buses throughout town, and then enhanced programs. Like I mentioned, that includes van pools, bike share, those kinds of programs, and then pursue clean energy. And then last was the no out-of-town fares.
And I think it's important to note that there are some projects on this list that overlap with projects on Appendix B. And so that kind of actually creates a better opportunity for us. And ODOT, in their wisdom, in a number of conversations that I've had with them, even prior to the rulemaking, has decided that this money will be flexible. And what that means in the, as far as the priority list is concerned, there is no requirement that you go in order. So even though it's in priority order, there's no reason that you have to do one before you do two or one before you do five. When we look at some of the services that we're looking at increasing service to, say, Salem, we would have to work with Salem Chariots because they would be responsible to pay their portion of that service as well. And so some of those projects may take a little longer to get underway, but some of the low-hanging fruit on our priority lists or project lists, we can, do more expeditiously. And with that, we also have again, I will never want to put together a plan if it doesn't include what would we do if we had additional funds. And that's what this next page is about. And I'll let Eric talk a little bit about some of the future projects that we're looking at.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this list of future projects is our next Appendix B. So it's going to look towards the future as if, what if we had additional funding? What can we do to unlock some of that funding from those additional pots through HB 2017? And so the first one here, we have mixed-use facility at Smart Central. We've visited about before here with the commission, and in the past, it's part of our transit master, not our master plan, but part of the design, the original design of the transit center to a certain aspect there, and that's something we've built on as staff from what we've heard from the community through other outreach opportunities. So that's something we want to put into this plan to look at a concept for future design, possibly getting a third party in here to review that and see what it might look like, the pros and cons of that scenario. The technology investment, we want to keep up with technology, with onboard technology for our buses, as well as at our transit centers here. And you can see that image there is an example of what we could put at our bus stops, our bus shelters that are heavily used, with live bus tracking times for our customers to know when the next arrival of a vehicle is for their particular route. So we want to definitely keep on top of that and expand that program if there's additional funding available. The Grow Smart, so something we're definitely looking at with the addition of electric buses is electrical infrastructure. In this case, through solar panels at our operations center, at our offices over on the west side. And that would expand our electrical ingenuity there, so we can expand on our setting up additional charging stations for our buses as we continue to go green with electric buses and CNG buses as well. So the next piece to that is the Smart Facility Phase 2 expansion. As we expand our fleet, we need to expand our infrastructure, and that would be to the west of what we currently have, moving towards the West Operations and Maintenance Center there, filling in that. That's also was in the original plans, I believe in 2008, as far as the facility phase we have at Smart. The neighborhood community connections, that as we expand the city of Wilsonville, particularly Frog Pond and Coffee Creek, we want to make sure that Smart expands as well into those neighborhoods and areas. So we're going to design and create plans for that as infrastructure is developed. Bus coaches for 1X service, just providing a little more comfortable ride for those longer trips is something we'll look at as far as if there's additional funding available for those types of trips. So rather than transit vehicles, we would look for more of over-the-road coaches in the future as we expand into midday and possibly weekend service as well for that. So, and then coordinated medical shuttles. We would definitely want to expand our current program we have. We fund that through special transportation funds currently. Outside of SMART, we get through TriMet, and we would definitely want to expand that with outside funds if we could, to expand that program that has been very successful for us.
All right, thanks, Eric. And then our timeline for getting all of this project list through both the Planning Commission and the City Council there is before you. So we'll be back here on September 12th, and then October 1st and October 15th, first and second reading respectfully. And I think we want to move into, real quick, the last time we were here, Commissioner Mesbah asked us to gather some information on mixed-use, transit-oriented development projects. And so Nicole was able to put some interesting information together that we'll share with you real quick.
Okay. I just want to preface that I am not a TOD expert, but I did some research, and I hope this helps kind of give some examples of what a mixed-use facility could look like at SMART. So just to start off, first, of why entities look into transit-oriented development, what are the objectives for it? Mainly to incentivize and attract investment in the community and optimize the use of the transit system that's nearby it. Also to enhance that pedestrian and bicycle connectivity to transit and also to the city, throughout the city. Also to reduce the single occupancy vehicles, so there's less traffic on the roads. And then also a metro goal is to enhance those 2040 growth centers, which I believe one of them is identified for Town Center in Wilsonville. So if we get a bike ped bridge going, that'd be cool. Anyways, so, and then the benefits of TOD. So similar to the objectives, it encourages the non-motorized transportation, enhances the local economic development, and increases the land value. Reduces pressure to build higher density in other areas. That was an argument that was made for folks who prefer single story elsewhere, but still need that capacity. So it's one benefit. And then increases public safety and health benefits, offers housing affordability opportunities, and then just builds community and a more sense of place. Okay, so I have 3 examples. These are all partially metro-funded projects that are within our area, kind of similarly set up. And each project I chose for specific components are comparable to what a mixed-use facility would be at SMART. So the first one is the Knoll, and it's in Tigard. It was built in 2011. This is a 4-story, 48-unit affordable housing apartments only, and they're for seniors and homeless veterans. Specifically, the reason this one was comparable to the transit center at SMART was its proximity to the West Train. So their proximity is about a half mile, and Metro estimated that that increased ridership by 3,455 folks annually. We're closer to the west than a half mile if we were to do something at the transit center, so that would be a little more convenient for folks. The total development cost for this building was $6 million, and the taxable assessed value for this building is 0 because it's affordable housing and they don't pay taxes. They have a pass on that, so there was no records for that. And then the wait list for a unit to be in the affordable housing is a year. So it's popular demand to live for affordable housing for at least seniors and homeless veterans. The second example is Acadia Gardens, which is in Happy Valley. That was built in 2012. This one's a 4-story, same 41-unit affordable housing apartments on the upper 3 levels. And then on the bottom floor, it's more of a community space, secure bike parking, things like that. This one was $10.6 million to develop, and the taxable assessed value is about 1.8. And the reason that this one, even though it's affordable housing, has an assessed value is because there's different levels of affordability within each. So like 28 units are designated for those who make 60% of the median income, and then there's 20 some odd units that are available to 50% of the median income. So there's varied levels of taxes paid for the specific units. The last one is the Nexus, which is in Hillsborough. That was built in 2007, and there's 422 rental units. These aren't affordable housing units, but it is popular. There's no rental space or retail units available currently. The ground floor retail provides childcare and then a barber shop and a salon. That was $50 million to build, and the taxable assessed value is $37 million, roughly. So just a summary, there's been 41 projects that have been completed with the help of Oregon Metro, their TOD projects since 2000. So there's quite a few examples out there in our region. Our mixed-use facility would be a combination of maybe some of those examples that I showed with affordable housing, maybe at the different income levels to bring in that assessed value, and then have retail space on the bottom. And also just the importance of collaboration between Oregon Metro, the Clackamas County, and then affordable housing or partners, community partners for affordable housing. And then a TOD contact manager at Metro mentioned that usually the affordable housing projects are always full and have limited financial risk since they're subsidized already. And yeah, they have a large wait list, which we saw from those examples before.
Yeah, and that rendering to the right there is what Smart Central could look like. The only building that currently exists is the one in the forefront here, and then the 4 buildings in the back are what we're looking at ultimately.
Great. When do we break ground?
Well, believe it or not, we had, since I was here last, I think we had a major developer in the area that was interested in a 99-year lease on that. He said, he did. He said, I'd develop it tomorrow for you. And I believed he would. So we just, I just think it makes good sense, ultimately. But it's down the road. This is.
Dwight, you need to tone down your magic field just a little bit.
Just one little final point, though. I mean, if there's actually one thing that I know. Broke it. I mean.
I know, that's clearly. That was a weird noise.
That's better. You turned somebody down in the back, so somebody doesn't get to talk anymore.
Somebody doesn't like TOD.
If there's one space that I understand a lot is affordable housing projects, and I will say that they are tough to manage and operate. I mean, yes, people are willing to build them because the incentives and subsidies are definitely there. It's a long-term thing where it gets problematic, just so everybody's aware. I mean, I'm familiar with just about every one of these developers in the Portland metro area, and they'll tell you it's great to get them off the ground. It's a question of what they're like 10 years later and how hard it is to keep them sustainable over a course of time.
So if I recall correctly, the next steps are actually a public hearing next month?
That's correct. Here, yeah, on the 12th.
Okay. I guess, one thing that, and I think I talked a little bit about it last time we met, was, the concern of ridership and making sure that the things that we're planning for are all being with a very tight focus on increasing ridership. I mean, ridership is not improving right now at the large level. So I think anything that we do, we need to be looking at fundamentally, how can we improve ridership? Are we doing the right things? Are we planning the right things to increase ridership in the long run? Or are we looking at it, based on the existing transit methodology and not looking at, alternative solutions that'll work, not only for 2 years from now, but 20 years from now. And so as long as we're taking that look with these plans and taking that I would like to see at least something that talks about how each of these things in the plan are going to improve ridership or not. because I think that's a key component in making sure that we are spending our taxpayer dollars well, and making sure that we're using.
Well, we
right.
just recently, I think the monthly data showed a increase year over year for July was 8.72 or something, I think.
Yeah,
the number
it was up.
So we are seeing an increase in ridership. There are a lot of things, and TriMet will tell you, that drive ridership. And some of them are certainly within our control. Certainly advertising, which we have started to do, we're running ads. But then there are other things that are sometimes outside of our control. And so we control those things, or we work on those things that we can control, and then, just try to manage as we can, as best we can, those other things. But, yeah, I'd like to see all the buses full all the time. But even offering a free product, you realize that there are some people that will choose their car driving across town when there's a bus. And as I was sitting here, I watched the buses go by quite frequently. And for a city our size, it's a very robust system. And I can tell you that West Linn and some of the others are quite envious of us. And we have met with, we'll meet with West Linn, Beaverton, Hillsborough. They all want to know kind of what the secret sauce is. How do you create what SMART has created here? And we're very proud of it. So, but yeah, ridership is always going to be something that we're driven to increase.
So for content within the strategy, are you thinking more like vague factors that could contribute to increase in ridership for each project, or hard numbers on this? Going to Tigard or going to Hillsborough will provide access within a half mile of a stop to X amount of people, but that doesn't guarantee that they'd, right, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a former engineer turned program manager, so numbers are still really good for me.
Okay.
And so where they're available, I think we should be using those as a basis for decision making. Right. And in the absence of them, I think we should at least be looking at, from my perspective, each of these projects and how we expect that they're going to improve ridership. And if we have a project on there that doesn't really improve ridership, or we don't think it's going to do what we want it to do, well, then let's find something else.
I might chime in here too as well. One thing through HB 2017 is they do want to hold each agency accountable to numbers, but also understanding that those can be relative based on several factors. For us being a more suburban area, a little more spread out in our population is going to be different than obviously TriMet downtown. Sure. And so we are looking at those, and those are going to go in our application to TriMet to the OTC as far as, here's what we plan on for our performance measures. And if we don't meet those over the span of this plan, we might revisit that for the next plan to maybe change that route or add a new route that might be a little more come to fruition a little better. So.
Okay. Yeah, if you've got performance measures that you plan on having for these different projects, that's something I would absolutely like to be able to see.
Yeah, I think that's something, it's a fine line for this particular plan, but it's something we can put in here. Obviously, we don't want to get down into the details of planning and lock ourselves into something that we wouldn't want to be, but I think we can get some numbers in here that.
Yeah, and I don't think it necessarily has to be part of the plan, but at least in the presentation that talks through what the plan is.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect it to be in the plan itself, but some backup to be able to justify why we made the choices we did.
All right, great.
And, after having done this for a little over 3 decades, it's kind of a chicken and the egg kind of thing, because what I found is that it is usually frequency of service that increases ridership. High frequency service in our industry is anything that operates every 15 minutes or less. So if you're standing at a bus stop, you won't have to wait more than 15 minutes. I once operated a system, we had a 6-minute headway. So every 6 minutes, if you're standing on that particular block or at that bus stop, a bus would come by, and each one was more full than the next, but it was in a major corridor. And so, as Eric explained, we have a different operating environment here, and so, we have to try to be a little bit more creative in creating that, because, we could run all of our service every 15 minutes, but it's going to be very, very expensive in order to do that, so there's a balance. The good news is that we are the second largest recipient of HB 2017 funds in the Tri-County area behind TriMet. So no one else is receiving more funds than us from HB 2017 than TriMet. But then that gap is huge. So, I mean, yeah, but we're very proud of that, so.
When are we going to get the service to Portland?
So that's an interesting question. Being at the top of the list, an express route directly from Wilsonville to Portland is obviously very expensive. Just preliminary planning, hourly service all day would be about $1 million annually. So one thing we're looking at.
How much?
About $1 million annually for hourly service. One thing we're looking at currently to ramp up to that, in the long run, is looking at TriMet's Line 96 that goes from Tualatin. Basically, from there is an express to downtown. And rather than mirroring that service, we would make higher frequency connections to Tualatin, which would be much more cost effective for us. So that would be looking at maybe 20-minute frequency there rather than 60-minute frequency downtown. And if we were to offer that at a discounted rate or even free, then our customers would be paying one fee, one fare versus two. And the downside of that would be having to make that transfer. So trying to work with TriMet in their district and us in ours, and making those connections smooth and cutting that cost down initially is kind of our goal to start with.
Just because you're here.
Sure.
And we've been talking a lot about Basalt Creek lately. Any update on how that's been going, conversations, Basalt Creek, and how that would work with TriMet?
Well, the mayor has had a discussion with Doug Kelsey, who is the new general manager for TriMet, and they agreed that Doug and I would sit down after we put together a position paper. So Doug has asked us to draft that. We are working with Mark Otnet and some others to draft. It's not a legal argument. I think that may come down the road, but it is just our position on investing in Basalt Creek and what we expect from a transportation standpoint. We are going to be expected to provide that service, and I know TriMet has no interest in Frog Pond, Coffee Creek, or Basalt Creek, but they do have interest in collecting that revenue. And so we're going to make a very strong argument for that. Stand by. It'll probably get interesting before too long. But, and I also want to point out is that our project list is scalable. So we can do more of this if that's what the customers want, and it's obviously increasing ridership. We can do a lot more of that and less of something else. Right now, ODOT is, because it's so new, they don't know what they don't know, and so they're being very, very flexible with this funding. But there are deadlines, and we're really depending on TriMet at this point. If they miss the deadline for any reason, then we miss the deadline. We cannot submit without TriMet. And so I'm doing everything, I've been asked to do everything that I can to ensure that that happens. So I'm working as best I can. So.
Is it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will be seeing you.
Oh, yes, you will. Thank you. Have a good evening.
And I assume that all of us have perused the minutes of the City Council. I would point out it's not in the minutes because it just happened. The council has adopted the Basalt Creek concept plan. That's moving forward, short of any obstacle thrown up by Tualatin. For our part, we're good. Our work session, I note that we have, are revisiting the park.
Oh, Boone's Ferry.
Boone's Ferry Park again next month. Is that right?
October.
You can
Oh,
take
September.
that to October, and that is because in September, you have a, public hearing on the smart programs enhancement strategy, and then 2 work sessions, one on signage and one wayfinding, and the other on density and consistency. I also believe, don't you have a hearing that was continued to for ADUs? Oh, we didn't do a date certain. Okay, I believe that is supposed to also be on your September agenda, so you have a full 2 hearings and 2 work sessions next month on those items.
The big agenda for the fall will be the town center,
Correct?
2 work sessions and a public hearing
Correct.
and a report,
Correct.
a resolution, maybe. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we are ready to adjourn unless anybody has an objection. And we are adjourned at 9:13.
Less than a half an hour.
Yeah, less than a half hour late,
Yeah.
considering how much.
Well, when I saw this agenda.